They actually captured it. They bring it back and they say, no, this is a false flag, this is actually where the term false flag comes from, by the way. These ships would sail with many different flags. So they'd run up a fake one and be like, okay, let's fly the flag of whoever, won't get attacked. And that was actually very common in this day. And it was legal to run a false flag as long as you weren't firing on anybody. So their case is now that, well, this was a false flag. They say it's a British ship and they're lying. It's actually a French ship. Just talk to that guy. He's super French, right? Well, no. They actually go through all the documents and find out this is entirely a British ship. It just happens to have a French captain, and that doesn't make the entire ship French. So they have to return the ship to its owners and paid $11,000 in damages. So it didn't stop any misattribution problems. They did occasionally happen, but because the way the court is now set up, they can be held financially responsible for those issues. Right? So now the prize court actually has a framework to work and come back with those challenges, right? So can we utilize this knowledge? Can we, this model? Can we build sort of a cyber admiralty court that could issue letters of marque and reprisal, right? So then it's not just anybody can go out and hack back. We can actually have some sort of standards for who's responsible enough to be issued a letter of marque and reprisal to a trustworthy Red Hats. And again, not to go after whoever they want, but a specific target. So there are, from the get-go, necessary bounds on how this model can be used and who's would be legally attacked through this model. And of course, we can staff an admiralty court then to adjudicate a takedown. So we're going to say, okay, well, we want someone to go after this botnet or this spam ring, and we want them to take it down. We'll write letters of marque and reprisal, but once you do take down the botnet, you got to bring us the evidence. We're going to take a look at it, and then we'll sign off on it being legitimate or not. So a successful adjudication could provide, say, immunity from prosecution. We are in this sort of gray area with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act being so ridiculously vague, it looks like it outlaws hacking back. Well, maybe we could provide immunity if you're playing within the rules of the prize court. I mean, it's also a good way to get press. If you're working within the rules of the prize court, now you have a third party coming out and saying, yeah, you did this takedown and you did all the right things. So I imagine for researchers coming up in the world, this would be a great way to not only contribute to the community to take down some real bad guys, but also get recognition for doing this public service. And cash is always nice. There could be some money involved, right? Maybe there's a really bad actor out, a botnet everyone's having problems with. We pass the hat around. We'll throw in some money and put up a pot and say, okay, whoever's able to take it down and brings the evidence to that to the prize court. So now we have an open and transparent process. You get this money, right? So now we sort of have the framework to encourage people to work within this framework of transparency and accountability. So I'm trying to anticipate some objections to this model, and I think the first one, aren't I just kicking the can down the road? Have I really addressed the problems, right? Because I haven't said who deserves to get a letter of marque and reprisal. I haven't said who deserves to be a target. I haven't said how we set up these rewards to make all this balance in the first place, and that's all true. But my point here is that we could adjust those things as we go. We can raise the standards for who gets to be a privateer. We can talk about what's the standard for who gets to be target. Or to write out a letter of marque and reprisal and who should be targeted by this. But we could change that on the fly. Instead of trying to fall into the idea that the intelligent design fallacy, that we're going to design a perfect system and then go implement it, right? Instead, what we have here, I think, is a framework that could be adjusted. We could change the parameters. We could change the rules as we go. And I think that's a whole lot better than trying to, just flat out say no one's allowed to hack back, because people are. And more we're seeing reports or polls of people saying like, yeah, we're actually engaged in hacking back, right? If you ask anonymously, we can actually get people willing to do that. So it's happening. So I think we do want a framework to encourage a bit more sunlight here. Now, let's say you still completely oppose the idea of hacking back. You hate it, right? You don't want anyone, you still think this is going to be a problem. No one should be able to do that. I think you should still support my proposal, because we're still going to be adding transparency to this process, and you can now help define the acceptable parameters. If you don't like the idea of hacking back, well, my proposal is also a framework to stop hacking back. Because if you want to get involved, you hate hacking back, well, great, work with the Admiralty Court or whatever you end up calling it, right? Work to increase the requirements to get a letter of marque and reprisal. And we can reduce how much is going on. Increase the bond that's required to post up. And again, we're going to weed out how many people are really involved in this process. Increase the oversight and the standards to which we're willing to say, yeah, that's a legitimate takedown. The price court's going to sign off on that, right? So this framework not only allows us to responsibly legalize hacking back, but also reduce hacking back as long as we're encouraging people to work within this framework. Okay. So final thoughts, and sort of to wrap this up, I'm not saying that like we should all be hacking back. I'm not saying that it should be entirely prevalent. I don't actually know how common it should be. What I'm really saying is that the optimal amount of hacking back is greater than 0. That's about as much as I can really say at this point. I don't know the actual value, but I believe this framework would allow us to find out and have a way to be socially responsible with this, and that this framework would actually allow us to regulate ourselves so that we as a community are in a far better position to recognize, what's a responsible way to do these things. Have you listened to Congress talking about Equifax? They're still trying to figure out what this series of tubes is. I think we're way better off regulating ourselves than waiting for somebody else to do it, right? Now, I don't know if this process is the right way to do it, but I think I've at least sketched out a way where we can start to see, like, yeah, these are problems that are solvable, right? Yeah, not everybody should be hacking back. Yeah, that attribution problem could be an issue. What do we do with mistakes? But I think we can also build a system that recognizes those mistakes and can help hold people accountable to them. Right? And again, actually, a lot of reading going into this, and there's a few other talks I did on pirates and what we can learn about them. So I did want to call out some really great works and what I was able to learn about there. But we do have a few minutes left. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those. Or of course, I can later in the bar, feel free to bump into me and ask me anything. Yeah.
I really like the thought. I have some questions. So the privateering, it was very clear what the price was.
Mm.
In this instance, it's a little harder to say what is the price for those hacking back.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, right?
I mean, you obviously have to make it something large enough so that they want to do it legally. What is your, my follow-up question is, what is going to persuade those who are currently hacking back to switch over to this system?
Correct, right. Yeah, there's a prize built into the old system. We're out of time? Okay. So yeah, just to wrap up, there's a ship in the old model. It's very, very clearly a great prize too. In this one, I think it would be up to the court to find what that would be. I think some combination of the recognition you would get from a third party would be fairly valuable. But I think you may actually end up having to maybe put out some cash as well. I don't know how much that would take. I really don't know what the market wage is to get someone like, oh, I'm going to spend my weekend taking down this botnet. But I think that having this court would actually allow you to find what that value is. That's going to be a market decision. I don't know what the supply or demand of qualified privateers is in this market, but I do think the framework could find it, right? So yeah, that is one more question I don't have the answer to, but I do believe we're at least moving towards finding that, right? All right. Yeah, thank you.
Have you been able to float this idea to any congressman? As much as we hate to rely on them to get things forward, we have to rely on them to make it legal.
Right. Not yet. It's far more important to me that I engage with our community first. See what objections come out of this, and work with those as a starting point, and then reach out to legislatures, which is probably something I'll do after this. But I've gotten some really good feedback. I think my argument's actually been a lot stronger presenting it at cons and talking to folks like you. And then I think I'm getting to the point where I can sort of explain this to legislatures. And I don't care for politicians much, so I might just be like putting that off a bit. But yeah, I do think that's the next step. All right. I should probably wrap up and allow for the next talk to get set up here. But of course, if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. And thank you all for coming out.
this thing any louder now? Yeah. Awesome. What's that? I just turned it up. Yeah, there is. Yeah. Can you guys hear me in the back? How about now?
Okay, I'm really nice, and now I'm gonna be a jerk. Phil, from the front to the back, please.
Taz, can you hear me back there?
I can't hear you back there. They're coming to fix it. If there's an empty seat next to you, please raise your hand.
Hey Corey, how's the gain now that he's turned it up? Testing 1, 2. Is the gain okay? Okay. Check, check. Can y'all hear me now? Good.
Hey, speaker.
All right, hold on.
Do you want me to keep this door from open?
Oh. Can you guys hear me? Taz, can you hear me in the back? Taz, can you hear me in the back? Oh, there we go. Wave if you can hear me in the back. Can you hear me in the back? How about now? I can hear myself really well, but can you hear me in the back? Okay. All right.
Up a little bit, but not that.
Gotcha. You can just start talking and testing it out.
Okay.
Maybe if we know that probably won't work too well.
It's just tough as here because it's so close to the speaker, but it's definitely louder than it was. So, but if you still have a problem, just have someone call for Jason or whatever. I'll take a look at it. Okay. Yep.
He's in the consulting side.
Yes.
Yeah, see, I'm in 16. No, the problem is there may not be. Hold on, they got it. See, his question is, do we have
Let's get that set up here. All right, can everyone hear about me all right? Okay. Welcome to Building Better Backdoors with WMI. My name's Alexander. I'm a senior network and application pen tester at NetSpy. You can find me on Twitter at 0xBadJuju. You can also find me there on Keybase. You can also find our previous work with WMI on the NetSpy blog. And any code you see during the talk today can be found on my GitHub repository. So a quick overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to do a brief background of WMI. We're going to touch on how to obfuscate some fileless backdoors, and then look into how WMI can be used for storage on a target system, which will lead us into creating WMI providers and how to install those WMI providers and alternative methods. The two repositories that will be covered for this are for a power provider and Where's My Implant. So what is WMI? WMI stands for Windows Management Instrumentation. It's a subsystem within Windows used to manage Windows systems, mostly through data collection. It's been present since Windows 95. Given that it's 22 years old now, it's starting to show its age. Hopefully most people are familiar with some WMI functions. I know personally I used the Win32 process create method a lot for lateral movement. So WMI is very similar to a SQL server. So if you look at the namespaces, you can roughly make that equivalent to a database. A class can be roughly considered to be equivalent to a table. A property will be roughly equivalent to a table row. What becomes different is the properties can be either static or dynamic, so data can be dynamically pulled via WMI. So if you do the Win32_process query, you can get running processes which will change over time. A method could be roughly considered to be a stored procedure. And then if you look at the WQ Windows query language, which is how you query via WMI, the select statement is taken from a SQL type statement. So moving on to fileless backdoors. In this we're going to use a method called, or a PowerShell method called invoke WMI duplicate class. WMI has a good implementation of class inheritance. So with the Win32process class, that inherits from the sim_process class, which inherits from the sim logical element class, which inherits from the sim management element, and so on and so forth. So there's really no reason we can't make a child class of Win32_process that'll inherit all the properties and methods of Win32process. The two primary ways we can do this is through the derive method and the clone method. A couple days ago I saw Matt Graber tweeted something out about this. And it's a great way to hide things. So in this example, we're going to take the Win32process class, and we're going to duplicate it into a class called Win32_create. And in this demo, just show a basic example of this. So we're going to connect to a remote machine, and then duplicate the class and put it in there, and then call the create method of the duplicated class. So in logs, we'll never see a call for Win32_process. That's cool, but it's not a backdoor. The file list backdoors in WMI primarily come through event filters, event consumers, which is the action that's taken, and then the binding, which takes the trigger and the consumer and pulls them together. Primarily, when it comes to consumers, we see, for persistence, the command line event consumer, which launches a command line command, and then an active script event consumer, which launches some Visual Basic code. This is a pretty well-known technique. There's a great framework called PowerLurk that came out a couple years ago to automate this. Here's a basic example in PowerShell of how to do this. We have an event filter, which looks for a logon event, a command line event consumer, which launches a PowerShell command, and then the binding for the two. So if we take that duplicate class part, we can duplicate out the command line event consumer pretty simply. And just in this example, we're calling it the derived event consumer. So in case you're alerting, the blue team is alerting on a command line event consumer event, we can hide from that. Event filters are less easy to alert on in logging because there's a lot of legitimate applications that will use an event filter. There's a couple of built-in ones related to the Windows event viewer or event log. In this example, we're just, wrong one. I'm going to duplicate out the class for Win32_process. So we're connecting to our remote system, and then we've created the derived consumer. Now we're creating the filter for our logon event. Now we're going to create the consumer to consume that event, which is just going to create a text file. And then we're going to put in the binding. Now for this demo, I can't demonstrate that it works, but it works. Now the other thing we're going to cover before we get to the really interesting stuff is using WMI for storage. Now because WMI operates like a database, we can start inserting strings into that. So if we take a file and we base64 encode it, and optionally we can encrypt it as well, we can slice that base64 string into sections. What I've found is that in WMI, a string length of about 8,000 fits in pretty well. And then we can insert those sliced strings and then reassemble them on the other side. And we've wrapped this for this demo into a function called invoke WMI upload and invoke WMI remote extract. This demo is a little bit hard to see, but what we're going to do is connect to a remote system and then base64 encode and then upload that file to the remote system. Then we're going to launch a PowerShell command to extract it on the opposite side. So in this instance, we're taking a DLL and extracting it out into the Windows System32 WM folder, which is where WMI providers are just stored by default. That's cool, but we really need something to use it with. So working with WMI providers is not as difficult as it sounds. For this demo, I created something called Where's My Implant, which is just the DLL that's going to do all the work for the next couple demos. Again, WMI providers are the DLLs that do all the work behind the scenes. These host the methods and properties that we're going to call. So for that win32_process class, that's hosted within the simwin32.dll. And a very large number of other WMI classes are also hosted in there. So that's a good starting point. And if we're looking at building a provider, what does that take? Well, we have to build it, we have to find a way to register it on the remote system, and then we have to find a way to access it. Now, the process that hosts WMI methods is the WMI prv.se.exe, and it can host the common language runtime, so we can run .NET applications in there. It's literally as simple to convert a class over to a WMI provider as adding the decorators, the management entity, and management tasks for the class and methods respectively. This just is a good template that we use for creating providers. Now, a basic provider that's been done in the past is Jared Atkinson made one called the Evil Net Connection WMI provider to do command line execution, and then Casey Smith made one as a shellcode runner. They both work great. And here's an example of what the output of the PowerShell runner that Jared Atkinson wrote is like. As you can see, it can accept commands over the pipeline. And then here's just another one where we're going to do a PE injection on a remote process. In this case, it's a Metasploit bind payload. But unfortunately, we have to store it somewhere on disk. Primarily, this can be done through a network share. For the sake of simplicity in this demo, just did it just on that disk, which is not ideal. And so we ran that payload and injected it into the remote process, and then executed that remote process thread, which started the bind listener, and we telnetted into it. That's cool, but I feel like we can do better. We talked earlier about being able to store files in WMI. So what we can do is store those files and then extract them in the provider and then inject them. So this works well as a shellcode runner, a DLL injector, and a PE injector. So in this demo, we're going to upload a file to WMI and store it in the provider storage in a static class. We're going to then extract that file from WMI and then reassemble it and then inject it into a process. There we go. Again, this is also the same bind payload that we used earlier. And there we are. In this instance, we inject into the procmon process. But we can do better. So what if we tried to add more power into that? Why not put an Empire stager in our WMI provider? So in this instance, we're going to take a PowerShell payload. Sorry, we're going to specify the PowerShell payload as being, the Empire payload as being a PowerShell payload, and we're going to specify the server and the staging key. So just going to execute this, and we'll see the callback occur on the Empire server. The one thing to note here is that PowerShell.exe is never called. Again, the WMI PRV SE process is hosting the common language runtime, and we're just running it in a PIC type of situation. So that's cool, but what if we did it slightly differently? Let's rewrite the Empire agent so that it runs in C#. So we have an embedded Empire agent in there, and we don't need PowerShell anymore. So we don't even need to call the system.management.automation library. And sure enough, if we just specify the .NET for this provider, it'll call back. And as you can see again, we're in that WMI PRV SE process. So you should have a full Empire agent running on this system. That's cool, but providers are useless if you can't register them on the remote system. Historically, .NET providers would need to be installed via install-util. You'll see a lot of work coming out of Casey Smith with this binary. The one problem with this is that it triggers in a Windows event log 63, which causes some issues. So again, but we wrapped a command for that to do our remote installs after we write it out to the system. And just using the Win32 process to install. So, but if you look under the surface of what install-util does, it's functionally a one-line executable. All it does is call the system.configuration.install.managed installer class and the static and helper method. So what we can do is functionally run install-util from PowerShell without calling the install-util.exe. The one caveat here is the version of PowerShell version you're using and the .NET assembly need to match. The output is identical to install-util. That's cool, but we can do better. There's no reason we can't do a manual registration of our WMI provider through WMI calls. At a high level, what we need to do is create a WMI_extension class on our system, then create an instance in WMI extension for the Win32 implant class. And the Win32 implant class is what we're just naming it arbitrarily this time. Then we'll need to create an instance of _instance provider registration for WMI extension, create an instance of method provider registration for the WMI extension, and then actually create our class, and then register the WMI extension HKey class's root and HKey local machine. If that looks hard, it's because it is. It's awful. But why would we want to do that? Manually registering the provider allows us to bypass calling PowerShell and install-util on the remote system. And if you remember those pesky Event 63 warnings, That's because the managed installer class installs the provider using the hosting model of local system host. So it runs under the local system context. But there's others. Specifically the network service host, which is hosts Win32 process. So if you want to guess what that hosting model doesn't do, it doesn't trigger that alert. So because it's awful, created a wrapper for it where we just take in the library location and it parses out the library and then installs it as a provider. This takes a little bit longer, so for brevity, that's what the output of that function looks like. And then for blue teamers who are interested in what to look for when installing WMI providers, here's the Windows event log. And you can see it's pretty detailed. It calls out specifically what the WMI provider is, down to its public key token. So you can find out exactly what's going on there. Any questions? I know that was a lot of information quickly.
The event ID, the last screen.
Sure. That's event ID 63. Sure.
You say when you create a derived class that it might provide passive protection. Is there a simple way to check for all classes that derived from the
There is. When you open up the class, it'll, if you do like get sim class in PowerShell, it'll show you what the parent providers are. It's called the __ superclass,
Yep.
and that'll show you the parent.
Can you do a select from where superclass is?
I believe that that's possible to do. I haven't figured out how to do that query yet. What I would do, in all honesty, was WMI has a debugging log, which fills up very quickly, and because there's a ton of events occurring constantly. But if you alert on certain events, such as the derive and put methods, those will catch the clone classes. Well, I think we're basically out of time, but thank you, everyone. What's that?
Posting your slides?
Yeah, yeah. I'll post them on SlideShare. Yep.
See you. Thanks again.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, Discover? Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
See you too.
Yep.
That was cool. I was like going to get help, but I'm probably gonna use that. I like more of the lateral movement for the process. Create the clone and then just clone stuff rather than them watching the process, which is really cool.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thanks for stopping by. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So we're not utilizing it because I rewrote the ADIP in C#. So it's not necessary.
Okay, so it's not using, but the game's using like C#.
Yeah. It'll still run in,
But does it not say reference? Rename it as best you can.
well, because we
Using the
rewritten
format
it so
like-
it doesn't call PowerShell.
Yeah, okay.
So it's PowerShell assembly.
Okay, you guys can publish it.
Yeah, we'll publish that.
Okay, cool. That's like, all right. Thank you. That was awesome.
Thanks. Thanks. Let's do it. Yeah, I forgot. I actually got batteries and I forgot about them. Yep. Sweet.
When is this supposed to start?
I was supposed to start for another 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Looks like we got 10 minutes, so we'll just
Yeah.
hang out for a little bit.
For those who are already here, there's some stickers and random crap that our marketing company gave us. So if you want bottle openers or something like that, just hit us up afterwards. Monkey stickers somewhere. Oh yeah, monkey stickers. Small joys. I guess I have time to put the battery in this thing.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, this is 16 things. I was looking through photos that you had sent me, and then I swiped left far.
Nice. That's pretty fun.
That guy had sent that.
Oh, guy. Hey, look at that. It works. Yeah. Keeping 5 minutes on it. That was like a million miles an hour. What's that? Said I keep in 5 minutes under. That's amazing. I think we answer really good questions. Dude have pretty good questions. Yeah. Nice follow-ups.
It's funny because I feel like you actually covered more.
Yeah, I know, right? I was talking like a million miles an hour.
You weren't.
Okay.
You're talking at a very steady. I was actually originally worried. And I was like, no, it's fine. Right.
Yeah.
It's great. That's what you want. Started.
Is there a doctor lady? Just like 5.
Is it 5 more minutes? I know there's some big talks for now. I'll do it. Sure. If you're efficient. I'll see if there's any other.
If you have an empty seat, can you guys raise your hand, please? You guys can scoot forward to the right of the parking lot.
She's like doing a presentation. I'm like, so gentlemen out scholar. Do what I can. Guarantee I'm gonna split Probably wait. Just do it. All right. All right. It's about that time. So thank you guys for coming. We're going to be talking about SQL Server attacks today. So last year, I was lucky enough to present here as well, and it was also on SQL Server. I focused a lot on discovering SQL servers, gaining initial entry, doing privilege escalation within the SQL Server layer. I got a lot of feedback from people in the community, and they were really using it more for post-exploitation as kind of a medium for persistence. And so I tried to spend more time in this year's talk really focusing on those items. Let's see if my actual clicker is going to work. The goals will be very briefly to touch on the most common way we're getting access to SQL servers during internal pen tests. We're going to talk about how to identify and try to hide from some of the audit controls that exist on that SQL server layer when you're trying to execute on red team engagements. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about how to execute OS commands through SQL Server in different ways, not just relying on XP command shell. This is sweet. We're going to talk about a lot of the cool work that Alexander Leary did. He ported a ton of these PowerUp SQL functions over to PowerShell Empire. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some tips for the blue team. All right, so just to get us started real quick, this is Alexander. You may have met him in the last WMI session. I'm Scott Sutherland. We both work for NetSpy as network and application pen testers. Like I said, last year I did a talk on PowerUp SQL and SQL Server attacks. And so that slide deck and this slide deck will be out on SlideShare later today. So we should just tweet those out, or you can go just check them out. But let's just get into it with the time we have. So we'll talk about, this is kind of our most common escalation path for SQL Server. I talked to other pen testers, and they seem to share this experience. The general idea is during some pen test, red team, et cetera, you have some domain user access. You use that access to query the domain controller for SQL servers that are associated with the domain. You then attempt to log in using normal domain user credentials, and for various reasons, you'll be able to log in to quite a few, which were covered in the other talk I did. And then we're just going to do UNC path injection. So we're going to force the SQL server to authenticate to us, and we're going to be able to capture that hash and either relay or crack it. So the attack flow kind of looks like this. Domain user has excessive privilege to log in. They have public role in the SQL server. There are a number of different functions in SQL Server that are available to that least privileged public role that they can execute. That's going to force the SQL Server to authenticate to the attacker's IP. They're going to crack or relay the passwords, and then they're going to have basically the credentials for the service account running SQL Server. And the reason this gets you sysadmin in SQL Server is that in every version of SQL Server, the service account has sysadmin privileges. No one can tell me why that is. I've talked to people at Microsoft and DBAs. I'd recommend to just take it out of the group, but I'm really afraid what would happen in production. So if any of you guys know the answer to that, I'd be really happy to hear it. One of our guys, Thomas Elling, put together a function for PowerUp SQL that just automates that entire process, which I'll show you a quick demo of. He's our super all-star, you know. You may notice as we go through, this is a Toy Story theme because we're releasing so many functions and toys that we thought it was appropriate. So the general idea here is you're going to import PowerUp SQL however you prefer. We can see we're running as a normal domain user with no special privileges. Domain user. We're going to go ahead and run that function that he created for PowerUp SQL. It's invoke SQL UNC path injection. We're super creative with our naming. We're basically just going to set our capture IP to our local system. So when it goes and tries to authenticate to all the SQL servers, they're going to be trying to authenticate back to us. And we're going to be using on the back end Kevin Robertson's invoke Inve, which is basically a responder for PowerShell. It's a completely awesome toolkit, so go check it out. So he gave us permission to use that. So you can see we're already getting hashes. All we had to do is put in our IP running on a domain system. So it works pretty slick. You can then store all the hashes as a variable if you want. It captures the clear text if there's clear text, netNTLM v1 and 2. I'm typing really slow in this demo because it was like 2 in the morning and I had too many jacks, I think. But anyways, you can see there's your netNTLM v2 password hashes. So it's a good way to get a head start kind of in this process. But once you've established sysadmin rights and you want to kind of use SQL Server as a beachhead or a means to kind of execute commands and move laterally through the environment, you kind of want to do so carefully because some DBAs are actually very aware of some of the techniques that attackers are using, and they're auditing for this stuff. And SQL Server really has a robust audit capability. It can be very, very granular. So as an attacker, we want to keep this in mind. The way that the audit configurations are set up is you basically define a server level audit. That maps to server audit specification, which basically means configuration changes on the SQL Server, meaning the SQL Server application, not the underlying OS. And then for each database on the server, you can audit very specific things. It can get very granular. So quick note, I have a lot of TSQL in here. I did create TSQL templates that are out in the PowerUp SQL templates directory. So everything the commands do, you can just pull down and do manually. Because if I was you, I'd want to do that. So I'm going to show some quick examples, but I'm going to gloss over a lot of the code. So just know that it's out there. You can go check it out. So in this example I created, I'm an attacker coming in. I found a DerbyCon audit set up. I then went and looked at the server audits, and I can see that there's some audit change monitoring going on in any server operations group, so that's all those config changes. We can see it's enabled. And then when you get to the database level, you can get really granular. So in this case, I'm auditing for the blue team's auditing for very, very specific things. We can see it's also enabled. So as an attacker, what are you going to do? Some people just say, let's remove it. Generally speaking, not OPSEC safe. Some clients will just fire you for doing stuff like that. So from a professional perspective, I don't think it's a great idea. You could disable them, which is less impactful, but there's some negative effects there from a detection perspective. So what we try to do is we just try to get a lay of the landscape, understand what they're auditing and what they're not, and just choose techniques that they're not auditing. Super simple. So it's a funnel approach, right? For those people who are a little bit more adventurous and do want to disable or remove audit controls, there's some sample code there for you guys. But just note, if you do go in and disable it, if they do have that audit change group, they are going to know that you're changing any of the audit control configurations, because that's essentially what that does. So the blue team's going to be on your ass really quick. So just be aware they'll be watching. There's a couple PowerUp SQL functions there. There'll be a summary slide at the end, but just know you can look at both the database and the server configurations. So here's where we're going to spend most of our time, talking about executing commands through SQL Server. For those of you who didn't see it last year's talk, this is just a reminder. When you're executing OS commands through SQL Server, you're not doing it as your SQL user, and very often you're not even doing it as your Windows user if you happen to log in with Windows credentials. Very often you're going to be pushing through different layers and running as either a service account or something else. These can land you in different roles, sometimes local accounts, sometimes domain accounts, or domain user, domain admin, different types of managed accounts. But generally, as we walk through these scenarios, you're going to be, this is kind of like how SQL Server is set up, right? We have the Windows operating system. SQL Server runs as a service in the background. Within that, you have a bunch of different user mappings, but when you execute commands on the operating system, most of the time it's going to be one of three scenarios. You're running as a service account, you're running as a Windows account that's been set up as a proxy, which we'll talk about briefly, or you're running as the SQL Server agent. There's a bunch of other services I haven't even dug into yet that are associated with SQL Server, but that's the gist for now. All the methods we'll be talking about boil down to some pretty basic command execution methods. We're going to be using .NET, we're going to be using C++, and we're going to be using COM objects via common scripting engines. So let's just get XP command shell out of the way really quick. It is just a C++ exported method that's mapped to an SQL Server stored procedure. That's all that is. It was a native method created by Microsoft. It can be executed by sysadmins by default, and you can also have a designated proxy account to run as a different domain user. I don't recommend doing either of those things. You can possibly help it. We do see some attackers, these are common attacker scripts, right? Reinstall, if it's been fully uninstalled, you can reinstall it from scratch. You can re-enable it on the server and run it. And so the questions I get from red teamers a lot is, are people watching for this stuff? I did also create a PowerUp SQL function for this as well, and it's been around for a while. So they're asking, can you see me? And about a quarter of the time, I'd say they are. If people are looking for OS command execution, they're looking explicitly for this most of the time. So somebody spent a day making this guy. This is just like the best crossover ever. Anyways, but from an attacker perspective, there's good news because there's lots of different ways to execute commands. I have a short list here. I'll kind of walk through them as we go through instead of right here, but this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the options that I started to discover over the last few years. So first, extended stored procedures. These are just going to be custom versions of XP command shell, right? It's just a C library with an exported function. In this case, I'm writing it. The neat thing is when you register it, you don't actually have to point to a .dll file. It can be a .txt, like a rename file, so that helps for a little bit of hiding yourself. And you can also load it via WebDev. We've done this in the lab using some proxy authentication stuff. We're trying to set up a PowerShell script to automate the entire process so you could, in theory, reflectively load a custom extended store procedure. So that's a work in progress. General steps are compile your C++ DLL, register it. I have code examples for these out in the PowerUp SQL templates directory as well, so you can take them and run with them. Generally speaking, you get, I don't know if you guys can see it down here, but it's basically just your exported method, pretty straightforward. And then I just put in some basic examples of how to execute commands through C++. So you guys can run that at home. This is just a sheet of different ways to register it in SQL Server and run it. I have the highlighted one. This is my favorite, right? You're going to be basically registering your custom C++ DLL method from WebDAV. That's what this path looks like. And we're going to rename it TXT. So it can look pretty arbitrary coming through your proxies and stuff. But something to be aware of. I created 2 functions for this, one for creating custom DLL files that just execute your arbitrary command, and then also for just like scanning for custom stuff. So if you're looking for what your dev team's done or potentially malicious stuff, you can run those functions. The sexiness this year that everyone talked about a lot was CLR. So these are just .NET DLLs that you load into SQL Server to extend the kind of native functionality of SQL Server. Very similar to the C++ DLLs, you're just going to be mapping a function in .NET to a stored procedure in SQL Server, right? The difference is that it's just gonna run in the the .NET runtime. Let's see here. There's a number of dependencies. Oh, real quick shout out. As I was doing development for this, Lee Christensen and Nathan Kirk put out a couple tool sets which are really awesome. So props to them for getting that out. It definitely saved me some time when I was putting things together. The downside to using CLR assemblies is it does, if they're not already enabled on the system, it really requires a ton of configuration changes which can set up flags everywhere. So it's incredibly flexible medium for command and other execution, but can be kind of loud and conspicuous. This is just another code example. I'm not going to go into it, but it's the same general idea. There's an exported function, more or less, and you're doing code execution. The really cool thing, so this is just kind of a registration example. One thing I didn't note here is that the best thing about CLR assemblies that people tend to like is instead of registering a DLL from a physical path, whether that's local, UNC, or WebDAV, you can actually convert your DLL to like a hexadecimal string, and you can use that string to register the CLR, which means you don't have to have it read from disk anywhere. So you can literally inject this in a normal SQL injection. Find a web app, escalating through SQL Server, you can load your custom DLL EVO file onto the server, essentially. Another interesting thing we saw during pen tests is we tend to just select and see what custom assemblies are already there, made by developers. We're finding encrypted keys to decrypt data. We're finding passwords to other services that we can pivot through. So we created this set of functions in PowerUp SQL. We have the ability to create your own CLR. It randomizes all the class names and all that stuff, so it's harder to detect. We have one just for executing commands. It will build up and change all the configurations that are needed and restore state at the end. And then selecting stored procedures. The other thing we realized when we were looking at existing stored procedures is the DLL, when it's imported, is actually stored in its entirety in the database, which means we can export them back to their original DLLs. So I can go into a database, I can extract all the DLLs, and then I can start reverse engineering them or backdooring them, which is really cool. So we did a couple blogs on that. So check that out if you're interested. But in the interest of saving time, we'll keep moving. OLE automation procedures. So this is basically the ability to execute on COM objects through SQL Server natively. It's been around since 2000. It's been in malware since SQL has been around. So this is probably one of the more common ones that people don't talk about a lot, but the darker community kind of is really, really aware of. So it's nice. You basically have to flip one bit on the configuration, and then away you go. You can execute commands. You can do WMI execution. Anything that COM can do, you can do. Here's a really quick example calling the wscript.shell. That's kind of like the standard that you're seeing with Casey Smith and Matt Nelson are kind of putting out a lot on lately. So these sample scripts that are also out on the directory on the GitHub will kind of just show you how to execute command, write to a file, read that output, and then display it through SQL Server. So the function that I have for this, you can kind of see it will reconfigure everything if it needs to, restore state, and then clean up after itself, etc. So it's kind of fun. As a bonus slide, Leary got me to kind of put this up. A lot of people really like PowerShell download cradles, right? Download your payload from the internet and run it. Everyone's super excited about that. Pretty much every method we have here can do that. So I'm just kind of highlighting the fact that with using the comms, we're putting together a HTTP request out to the internet. We're pulling down, this could be any URL. We're pulling down our command. down here. This is just displaying it for the sake of the example and then executing it. So you could have it execute anything all the way down to the OS level. And it's pretty ambiguous. So it's kind of neat. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about SQL Server as a platform for persistence. The other one that's got a lot of attention is agent jobs. So these are just scheduled tasks that exist on the SQL Server. Got a couple nods, okay. SQL Server layer. By default, sysadmin's going to run under the context of the service account of the agent. If you're running in a lower user context, you're probably running with one of these roles, and they require a proxy account. And that's where that other Windows account comes into play. The DBA will have to specify that usually. But there's a lot of different types of jobs. These are the top 5. We spend a lot of time analyzing these in large environments. These are the top 5 type of jobs. The top, I guess, 4 of the 5 can execute commands. So it's kind of hard. It's pretty easy to blend in, I should say, as an attacker when most of the stuff executing in the environment legitimately already falls into, these categories or these subsystems. One important note when you are running commands through agent jobs, the agent service has to be running. Not everybody has it on. But once you do that, you can create the job and configure it to self-delete. It's a recommendation, so then it can run in the background by itself and just clean up when it's done. Just make sure that that job's not going to exhaust all the memory of your production database server or everybody's losing their job. So just think about that. Here's another couple I have examples of about 3 or 4 subsystems I'm going to go over real quick. We have CMD exec, which does not use XP command shell. It's a completely different library. So when you're tracing that, it's going to be different, but it's verbatim, just Windows commands. PowerShell, I think it wraps the management automation system, management automation. I always mess up the language, but basically the PowerShell library. And then so you can just pass these in and it creates a run space for it. JScript, which you've been seeing from Casey Smith and the other guys quite a bit. So we're literally going to be doing the COM object calls, right, for shell execute, shell application with shell execute, and passing in whatever we want. Same with VB script, right? So we have all these different types. We have a lot of variability. And like I said before, with COM objects, it's pretty well known. Everyone chats about it. Like you can do full WMI. Other subsystems on the window you saw earlier, you can do full HTTP request response. You can connect to LDAP. So literally you can do anything. So this is just like the simplest thing you could possibly be doing. If you really are getting interested in it, there's two nice tools. There's OliCom Object Viewer, which has been around for Microsoft for years. And this one came out a couple of years ago, I think. The oliview.net. I can't remember the author. Was that Fauché? I can't. Again, never mind. Anyways, check them out. The URL is down at the bottom for those who are interested. Similar to the other things, coming in as an attacker post-exploitation, just listing the jobs. This is just an example of jobs I created. You can actually go through and view the source code for those jobs. And we find decryption keys, and we find passwords, and we find methods for pivoting, and all kinds of stuff. So it's not always just persistence. It's not always command execution. Sometimes it's about privilege escalation. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We did create this Get SQL agent. It can run and give you a list of all the jobs and that information. Also, if you run it on scale in a domain context, you can get a lot more information, but this was a smaller sample domain. But you can get a breakdown of how many jobs are across your entire environment, how many instances, what the job types are, and things like that. So it's nice when you're doing profiling in a target environment. Also, big thanks to Leo Lubig, who put together the agent command execution for PowerUp SQL. Because of him, we have basically these methods here to do command execution using PowerUp SQL through agent jobs. So that was pretty neat. Next, Microsoft is really trying to start to compete kind of in the machine learning space, right? They want to do big data analytics, and to support that, they've introduced 2 runtimes over the course of the last 2 years, 3 years. One is R, and one is Python. So they're completely different runtimes that have to be installed with SQL Server, so they're not always around. The other downside is that although both of those can be used to execute commands, if they're installed but not enabled, you can enable them as attacker, but it requires restarting the service. Once again, a normal person isn't going to restart a production SQL server. So there's some pretty big constraints there that makes them not very useful, at least at this point from an attacker perspective, but for due diligence, I wanted to make sure I was covering them. All right, there's a couple commands for those too. That's what it looks like, I think. All right, File auto runs are also really neat. So just short summary for those who aren't familiar. Basically, you drop a file on the disk somewhere, and then it executes after a certain action, like user logs in, system restarts, service restarts, whatever. So there's a couple different methods I have here. One is, there's a number of providers in SQL Server that allow you to connect to LDAP, to files on the systems, to Excel documents, to Access documents, all kinds of different things. I'm not going to go too hardcore into those. The one that I wanted to focus on today briefly was the bulk insert file copy, which is kind of a novel technique that was discovered by Auntie. It's one of our app guys. So the gist, let's see here if I'm going to get this right. So historically, people use bulk insert to read files from the disk. It's a pretty common, well-known method for both attackers and legitimate use. What Auntie was playing with and figured out is that it also has some extended error handling functionality. So what you can do is create a temp table, which you would normally, put the data into after reading a file. You basically set it up to be an integer or int, and then you can read your file from a UNC path, local path, webdev path, right? It's going to suck that down. That's essentially going to be some type of varchar, whatever, some type of ASCII string thing. It's going to try to put that into this field, and it's going to get a casting error. So we're forcing an error. And with the extended functionality of bulk insert, what it will do is it will take this source file content and it will place it anywhere on disk for you. So I can literally set the path and the name of the file with the extension and drop it anywhere on the disk. So it's a really cool way to copy files down from the internet to your target, but it's also kind of amplified when you're using it for auto run execution on the OS level. So props to him for that. Very cool. All right, so that was a lot of stuff really fast. I acknowledge that. I did create some cheat sheets. I'm not going to go over them in their entirety, but technique, function, and then the TSQL template file that's out on GitHub. Trying to save some time for people. This is a breakdown of requirements for the different for the different techniques. Not going to go into that either, but offline cheat sheet for those who want to use it. Make your eyes bleed a little bit. And in future research, like I said, there's all these cool providers in SQL Server. I've only looked at like 2 of them. There's probably 5 more natively, and I'm pretty sure you can add your own. So there might be some really cool potential in the future here. And then with all the audit functionality, scanning and stuff, my goal is to have one command execution function, basically scans your privileges, scans the audit configuration, chooses the best option for command execution, and then runs it for you so you don't have to go through that all manually. So that will come down the line as well. Probably do a blog before next year. So, all right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Leary.
So kind of short in time, so we're going to fly through this. Over the past year, we've written a bunch of PowerShell Empire modules. What just happened?
You unplug them
Oh, who let me know the computer? Whoa. All right, who let me near the computer? All right,
F5.
F5.
Escape. F5. Shift F5.
Shift F5. What is going on?
I'm gonna have a seizure. This is probably the worst way to get there, I acknowledge that. What if I just hold it down? Is this gonna work? Yeah. It's way easier. Bear with us. We're gonna get there, I promise. Eventually.
All right, here we are. All right. Over the past year, we've written a bunch of PowerShell Empire modules for PowerUp SQL. Just a brief overview of those. Yeah, more Empire. So we wrote the Get SQL Instance Domain, which is an Empire module to find SQL servers. The Get SQL Server Info, which will pull down basic information about the SQL server. Most importantly there, in the context of Empire, whether or not you're a sysadmin. And then Get SQL default login password, which will check for default logins that we found over the years. Get SQL query, which will just run a default, just a simple query. Get SQL column sample data, which will start pulling in down sample data from all the SQL servers that we specify. This is really useful for us when we're doing, say, a PCI engagement. We're looking for plain text credit card data. And then invoke SQL OS command, which is the one everyone wants. That one just launches XP command shell command through Empire. There's your basic output of running Who Am I. We also put in the capability just natively to generate an Empire stager and run that so that we can just skip that. And then, today we've come up with a bunch of new techniques. Many of these we ported over. We'd like to get some feedback about what you're interested in seeing be ported over to Empire, and we'll start working on that in the next coming weeks. All right, back to you.
Sure. I realize we're like 2 minutes down already, so I'm going to just really cut through this. So for the blue teamers, short of all the fun little graphics, this is a little light instruction guide for auditing for the command execution techniques that we talked about today. It's going to walk you through how to create the audit, the server configuration, and the database level configuration for the commands that you don't run up very often, right? And you're pretty much only running if you're registering a DLL or you're executing OS commands. I also have the event IDs for most of the configuration changes and most of the command execution. So that should be handy for SIM cheat sheets, etc. And with that, I'll give it to Leary, and we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
Super fast.
Okay. So takeaway number one is just because you're logging on XP Command Shell doesn't mean you can catch all command execution options. As we've seen, there's a ton of them. Also, SQL Server can be a beachhead to avoid detection. Traversing and doing lateral movement via SQL servers has been our go-to method for the past couple of years. It still works because nobody audits on it. Please start auditing on those. And then, we've simplified this out and lowered the bar by, and the barrier to entry by porting it over to Empire, which, simplifies things immensely. And then just remember, blue teamers, everything we've covered today can be logged in some way, shape, or form. You just have to do it. So, questions?
Sorry. Well, thanks everybody for coming.
Yep. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Also, if anybody wants a monkey sticker, or we have these little bottle opener things, hit us out. We'll be outside the door. I'll give these to you.
Yep.
I know. I'm trying to give you the cues before it's 5 or 10.
Yeah, I know that.
You guys fried my brain.
Awesome. Nice.
That's the Scott way. Stick 160 slides in 20 minutes.
Mission success.
All
right. Oh, you got this.
Thank you. Stickers.
Very good on your way.
You get a couple.
Yeah. There's little ones and get some big ones.
I think we gotta move it.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
Slide here.
Oh, geez, you guys have stickers?
Yep.
I'll plan this already.
See, I can't follow that. I didn't bring anything.
The slides would be available.
Yeah.
Do you want
Oh, bottle opener. Bottle? It's on GitHub.
That's by
a bottle opener?
I gotta travel back to Canada, but
That works.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm glad you like it. Yeah. If there's anything you guys like to see, let us know. We'd love to build something out there.
That's why
No, thank you.
PowerSQL. And
kind
then
of-
/PowerSQL. The slide deck will be up.
That's awesome. Smart thinking.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Which one did you guys use?
I used this one, I think.
This one? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Stay, be in the seat. If you're leaving, get out. Thank you. If you're having a conversation, please take it outside of the room. All right. Can I get a line?
She's very assertive.
This is the one. Yeah, they told me the wrong one.
It's not a DEFCON goon.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, completely different one than I've used in other. So, thank you, Andy, for. Is it the window they have to? Do you guys know how, Joe, do you know, to show a different window? Is it next pane? Is that?
If you do like start slideshow and we just jump on, just try.
Yay.
All right. Okay, cool.
Sweet.
Y'all are freaking outstanding. I love you
Do you have any audio off your MacBook or anything you need?
Nope.
All right, sorry.
We can start? All right, well, thanks everyone for coming. I actually thought this might be somewhat of an empty room, so this is wonderful to see. I'm Andrea Lundbog. I'm a social scientist at Endgame, so I do a lot of research on the more geopolitical and larger overarching trends within cybersecurity. And so one of the ones that I've been seeing and researching and talking about a lot lately has been this integration of offensive weapons with disinformation and the role of automation and augmenting both, and how attackers are leveraging these three together as their overarching playbook. And so it's important to note that for today's attackers, information security is basically synonymous with information control. And so that includes everything from theft to manipulation to destruction to disinformation. And that is achieved through these three areas, which we'll talk about today: the warriors, the trolls, and the bots. Given where we are in this audience, the one that you're most familiar with, we will start with the warriors. And so the warriors, I know that cyber warriors is one of the more unfortunate terms probably within this discipline. But it refers to the experts in computer network operations, either offense or defense. And since we'll be talking about attackers, we focus on the ones involved in offense. And so when applied to adversaries, it's important to know, and I'll just go through this really quickly since this is very well known by everyone in this audience. Everything from more basic approaches, I think about OPM was credential theft, phishing and so forth. These are very common these days, to all the way, the whole spectrum, all the way to something like crash override, which is very sophisticated wiper malware aimed at a Ukrainian electric grid. And so, given this range of capabilities that are out there, these are only continuing to grow. I mean, especially wiper malware is something that over the last year, we're really seeing an increase in that, and showing the evolution of the warriors' objectives, moving, including recon and espionage, but then moving beyond into other forms of destructive objectives as well. And so, as long as the warriors continue to act with impunity, we're probably going to see it's an increasing depth and breadth of the kind of tools that are being used. So who are the warriors? And this is the ones that we always think about. We always hear about US, Russia, China, Israel. Iran made the news this week with APT-33, North Korea. And so those are the ones we normally think about. But the important thing here is that we're starting to see more and more of a proliferation in other countries and different kind of actors starting to get in the act as well. And so countries that you would not think about normally as being, for sure, not geopolitical powerhouses, but given the asymmetric nature of the cyber domain, we're seeing some of the smaller countries with very limited resources starting to get in the game. Sudan is a good example. They have their group of the electronic jihad, which basically is used to, in theory, to go against ISIS, but it in reality, it's something that's used for enhancing the surveillance amongst the domestic populations, it's targeting different kinds of reporters, and really is going against any kind of opposition to Bashir. And so that's one level where they're using some of the capabilities that we're seeing in some of the major powers disseminating down to some minor and smaller countries. If you think about Mexico over the summer, if anyone's following the spyware report that came on, so the Mexican government has been accused of using spyware to spy on journalists and NGOs and media who are reporting on the students that went missing. So again, that's in a democratic state. So while a lot of this that I'll be talking about, especially when we get to the trolls and more authoritarian regimes, these capabilities are also being used by some democratic countries as well against their domestic populations. And then Vietnam is another example. There's been a group linked to the Vietnamese government who also has been accused of leveraging some spyware and some other kinds of offensive weapons against both their population and multinational corporations, both within Vietnam and outside. And so given this rise of the rest that's going on, a lot happens in international relations, then you get the counter hackers or the counter warriors coming up. And so, and you think about in Ukraine, to help fight against the onslaught of attacks going against Ukraine. You've got the Ukraine Cyber Alliance, Ruhate is one of them, fighting back a lot of the activities that are going on in Russia. The Binary Guardians are in Venezuela. So as Venezuela slowly is imploding and going through some very worrisome transitions, the Binary Guardians are out there attacking government sites and trying to display a different perspective within Venezuela. And so going across all those are by no means a stretch of the imagination of all the countries that are out there, from Ethiopia to Ghana and just in Africa alone. Countries are starting to, and governments are starting to leverage a lot of the weapons that are out there. And so it's not just countries that are doing it. You got the various terrorist groups, criminal activities, and this is the whole range that you can see there, and some probably. They're leveraging these. And so then if you think about these different groups, there is a no one size fits all with the warriors. And so given the shadow brokers and Vault 7 dumps as well, nation state capabilities are starting to be more and more accessible to other parts of the globe. So we'll move on to the trolls, which is something probably not as much talked about, at least not necessarily as much within this community as far as in technical talks. But so whereas the warriors are out there to try and compromise the hearts, or compromise the machines, trolls are out there to compromise the hearts and minds. And so when we think about the trolls, they are generally linked to governments, but not always, and that's an important point. Sometimes they're actually loosely affiliated to governments to try and obfuscate the attribution issue as well. If you think about it, Russia's Internet Research Agency has a lot of the trolls associated or under them, but they're funded by a Putin ally, but they're also still linked to Russian intelligence. So they get these different layers that makes it even more complicated. And so the objectives of trolls is really to help shape the narrative, influence opinions, influence perceptions, and achieve certain objectives. And just like the warriors have their range of tactics, so too do the trolls. And so astroturfing is one of them, and that's basically the use of flooding the online forums with positive narratives about the government to then flood out any kind of negative opposition or dissent towards the government. And that is increasingly something used by authoritarian regimes for sure. But it's not just the astroturfing that's out there, so it's not just controlling that kind of dialogue. It's also creating fake personas or fake accounts or impersonating accounts as well. And in those cases, those are either used to help infiltrate networks, but they also can be used as a way to disseminate the various kinds of information and information that's coming from the government or that source. And then finally, disinformation, and that's one that I think we've all been seeing in the news a lot lately. That's basically the intentional diffusion of false narratives, false information with the intent to deceive and to help shape the narrative in that way. So that for across these three areas, you can see everything from clickbait to the use of state media to the use of these fake social media personas to help influence and spread the narrative. And so those are basically the major tactics being used, the themes that you see across different kind of groups doing this. For the most part, what a lot of them do is try and take aim at the attackers or at their adversaries. Those could be domestic or international. That's an important point to keep in mind. A lot of this is used domestically and then is used by the same entities for more of a global reach. And so it's either to weaken the adversaries, try and find divides within populations. For opposition, you can think about trying to spread disinformation about how corrupt they are, especially in countries where that may not necessarily be a legacy of that. And it even can be used to the point of justification for use of force, which we saw with Crimea. And so the topics really do range depending on the objectives of generally the government, but as far as the objectives of the funders that we see. Now, it's important to note that Russian trolls are not the only ones that are out there. I think that is sort of the Russian trolls what kind of comes off the tip of your tongue when you start thinking about the trolls, but they're by no means the only ones that are out there. China has their 50 Cent Party, and so that's a government-affiliated group that has really mastered the art of distraction with use of astroturfing. Common examples people point to is that the train incident that occurred in China 5 or 6 years ago. It started to get some negative press within China. Quickly, the 50 Cent Party came in and some other groups to really change the narrative and show that the government was having a positive response to that kind of event. And so that's very common within China. Turkey, one that you probably wouldn't think about as much for doing something like this, but the AK trolls are affiliated with the Justice and Development Party. And so they initially actually started going down the lane of doing astroturfing, but had some narratives go awry. And so they've kind of stepped back and are using more so state media to help push forth the government's narrative in that area. With Philippines, you got the Keyboard Army, and that's Duterte, along with some of the other authoritarian impulses that have been driving there within the Philippines. He's been very much so following from China's playbook and using astroturfing very much to craft the positive narrative in light of some of the negative opposition that's being pushed against the government, and doing a decent job at controlling the narrative within that area. And then finally, North Korea. And again, actually, that's just like the Warriors. These are not by all means exclusive of the only groups out there. These are just indicative of a couple of examples to throw out there. But for North Korea, it's an interesting example. You wouldn't necessarily think that they'd be involved, at least on the troll part. We hear a lot about them in more of the warrior and the attacks. But their group is aimed more so at South Korea, as opposed to domestically, given the limited internet access, although it is growing there. But aimed more at South Korea and building more societal divisions within South Korea itself. And so those are just a few of the copycats that are out there. So it isn't just Russia by any stretch of the imagination. But the other thing that's really interesting about the trolls is that they're going from having a focus more on the virtual world to having more of an effect within the physical world as well. And so I'll give you a couple of cases. LinkedIn, I think, has made the news a fair amount over the summer for being a platform where different groups, not just Cobalt Gypsy, which I'll talk about in a second, are leveraging LinkedIn, creating false personas, reaching out, especially to executives, and then trying to get into their networks and get them either to meet in person for more in-person physical infiltration, or online to get them to download various kinds of malware. And so Cobalt Gypsy is a good case in point. It's a Iranian affiliated group, and so the case of Mia Ash was written about a fair amount month or two ago, I think. And basically, it was a fake persona created by this group. She would reach out, to people who are working at organizations across the Middle East and North Africa, and even into the U.S. And she would target organizations from defense, energy, like oil and gas, finance, and so forth. And so pretty high targeted companies, but reaching out to them more through the social media outlet versus other kinds of infiltration. And in one case that I've seen highlighted is that she connected with someone on LinkedIn, from LinkedIn, made the connection, created a rapport, then went on to WhatsApp, then went on to Facebook, and then went to emails, eventually convinced the target to download a spreadsheet with malware within it. And so you can see it doesn't stay within a platform, it goes across the various social apps, and it can be really, really persuasive. But it's not just fake personas. The interesting thing recently also is fake companies. And so, in the research more, traditionally front companies are nothing new. But the creation of fake entities and fake companies in the virtual world is a novel take on that. And that's if you think about some of the research on Russia over the last few weeks, pointing out that there was groups associated with Russia that were created a fake company who then leveraged Facebook's event management invitation capability to try and create protests within the U.S. And there have been numerous cases of this popping up recently, and so that's something to keep an eye on. And that was a fake company crafted that then has real-world effects by organizing some protests. And so most of this is starting to, while it starts in the virtual world, it's starting to have some real-world physical impacts, which is a little worrisome. And so, looking at the warriors, looking at the trolls, and neither one of those are terribly new as far as you look at the range of behavior going on. But what is new is the use of automation and machine learning to enable them to get even more tactical objectives and have more of a global reach. And that's what's really changing the game, I think, for their impact and the severity of what they're able to achieve. And so that's what bots reflects, is this notion of machine learning or AI with automation for both the warriors and the trolls, using them in different ways, but at the end of the day, to achieve a broad range of objectives. And so the interesting thing here is and I'll walk through some different examples, it enables either the warriors or the trolls to really target find an individual or an organization, a certain machine, or enables the broad global reach. And that's something that is I think that's not necessarily appreciated quite as much as it should, because that's really, you can get as tactical as you want and strategic as you want with some of similar capabilities, which again is something that is relatively new. And then manifests in this range of, that's a whole list. It's not limited to that, but a whole range of objectives that can be achieved through the use of these capabilities. And so when you think about warriors and bots, how they use it, you can look at some of the research on adversarial machine learning, where you have machine learning defenders using machine learning offenses against machine learning defenses, so it's almost like the bot versus the bot, and that's very tactical, targeting very specific areas. But at the same time, you can leverage automation for something global. Anything NotPetya and WannaCry, great examples from the summer, of just the broad reach that automation is enabling the warriors to have, and will continue to do so. On the side of the trolls, I talked about that's Mia Ash, some research on there, targeting individuals, targeting specific companies and so forth, but also helping shape global narratives. And this is a screenshot from a Citizen Lab report that looked at the Russian propaganda and the different countries that the top countries that they've been targeting. But at the end of the day, it's enabling these kind of narratives to have more and more of a global reach, at the same time as very tactical. And so it depends on their objectives. And so I kind of walked through each of those on their own as somewhat silos and a little bit of the integration of the two. Really the way that attackers are starting to look at it more and more is how leveraging those three across the board for overarching objectives. So I'm going to walk through briefly 3 different use cases that we've seen over the last few years, 2 from the summer, of how attackers are using these 3 to achieve their more strategic objectives and have a strategic impact. The French election is one case in point. You can think about how the Warriors led to that data dump about 36 hours before the French election. That happened through infiltration of the Macron campaign and then dumping some of the emails. The trolls got on board, helped integrate with the emails, fake information, fake images, along with the real, which makes it harder and harder to figure out what's the real information and what's the fake information that comes from that. And so they also not only played a role in the data dump and its impact, but they also played a role leading up to it, where you saw a lot of Twitter accounts and various kind that were either linked back to either bots or to fake personas, spreading a lot of pro-Le Pen kind of narratives, and a lot of that has been linked back to Russia. And at the end, the bots were disseminating both. They were able to spread the amount of data that was dumped and spread the narratives as well. But it's not just elections, and that's something I think is really, really important within the U.S. to understand. Well, elections are absolutely under attack for this across the board. It's not just elections, it also can occur in wartime. And so the Crimean invasion is a good example of that. Back in 2014, the invasion within the Ukraine first had DDoS attacks going along with more of the kinetic attacks and forces into Ukraine from the Russian government. So it's one of those, probably not the very first, but and actually it's not the very first, but one of the first major examples where we can start looking at hybrid warfare, where the offensive cyber tools are used in a strategic connection with the kinetic tools used by the government. And it wasn't just the DDoS attacks. Those did contribute to more of an information blackout, which is important. And then from that, the trolls did started having, gain more access to the information, and they were propagating that information in the narratives, putting forth pro-Russian information, so that any kind of oppositional notion, there was a blackout from that perspective, and only got the pro-Russian notion. And infobots and various bot networks were used in both. And then finally, over the summer, something that I think it made made a big bump, I guess more so in the foreign policy community, but the Qatari tensions, where there was a hack of a news agency within Qatar, basically then hacked into it, the Warriors, and then planting fake reports that the Qatari emir had said something favorable about Iran and Hamas, which is enough to lead to a lot of instability and disruption within the Middle East, and that's what happened. And so you had that infiltration, you had the fake report, but then the bots also spreading all the trolls' information around. I think at one point there was something along the lines of 20% of all anti-Qatar bots were actually linked back to, our anti-Qatar posts were linked back to bots, and they were responsible for a disproportionate amount of the information coming out there. And what's interesting with, I think maybe didn't put up there, there was a battle of the hashtags that went with Qatar. So the government in this case actually did try and push back, leveraging their own bots, pro-Qatar bots, but they, apparently it was something that was more new to them, and so they weren't as organized and weren't able to infiltrate and spread the narrative as well as the anti-Qatar hashtags. And so you started seeing, it's interesting, you started seeing within social media the battle of the hashtags. And it was similar within with the French election, something about 40% of all Macron leaks hashtags that were put out there were traced back to just 5% of the accounts. And so you had accounts that were just posting by the minute, overnight, all the time, just flooding the narrative. So those are examples from more so nation states and governments, of course, but private companies are also getting involved in many of these different tools, both multinational corporations or private companies that are linked to the government, but also those that may not be. And actually, Motherboard had an interesting report just this week alone that talked about they found an organization that was at an arms convention in London. They found a booth with a company pushing forth cyber weapons, and for those cyber weapons, within the catalog itself, it ranged from weaponizing information, so it had more of the disinformation, those kind of activities, to DDoS services, to spyware, to to infiltration and exploits for industrial systems. And so I think it's really interesting about that case, and it's something that they'd seen a couple years earlier, is that shows you where the market demand is going, is seeing these all within one catalog of capabilities for attackers to achieve their objectives. And so I think that's really important because it really wasn't that long ago that Zuckerberg said, there's no way social media can have any impact on election. I mean, that was not even a year ago, really. Wasn't that long ago that people were talking about critical infrastructure and attacks on critical infrastructure. They kind of thought that was more fear-mongering. But we've seen over the last year, a lot of changes and transitioning of objectives, well beyond just recon and espionage into more of the destructive malware. And now we've got Stone Drill and Shamoon 2 and NotPetya and Block Energy and whatever might be the APT33 might have been using. I mean, it's going on and on and on, and at least it's out there, which means we're just going to start seeing more of an escalation. So while we've seen the Kiev attack in that area, the proliferation of things like wiper malware out there is more likely than not going to be integrated into these larger strategic objectives for these attackers. And so the important thing to note on that is that I think for the attackers, they're already looking through the battle for information security as information control through the socio-technical lens. And I think that's a really important point to note because once you start looking at it through that way, defenses need to then be structured accordingly. And currently they're not really. And this is, I'll leave with a couple of quotes there. For the most part, so in Lithuania, they're the Lithuanian elves to battle the Russian trolls. There's some fun videos that they've actually put together. If you ever want to look that up on YouTube, I'd recommend that. But for the most part, there isn't the playbook to counter this attacker's playbook. And I think it's going to be really important for this community. I think I was listening to the keynote this morning by John Strandon, talking about this community sort of blazing new ground going forward to help the defenses. And I would argue that blazing new ground will include this entire battle over information control. And I think this community will be at the forefront in figuring out how to battle and how to defend against this wide range of capabilities. And I think it's going to be essential going forward. The attackers already see this integration of these three as a playbook, and they're moving forward. And our defenses we're still caught flat-footed every time. So it'll be up to this community, I think, to help figure out some new and novel and creative ways to help defend against this the adversary's playbook. So thank you. I think we have a minute for questions.
I've got a question about norms.
Yeah.
So what role do you see norms playing in this, and how optimistic are you about having
God, that's an awesome question. Yeah, that's so it's interesting. So if I'm not terribly optimistic right now. This has actually been a really bad year for norms, which sounds weird. I presented on sort of the two different versions of norms at Enigma earlier this year, and I was more optimistic in January than I am now. Because especially if you look at, and there's some initial signs that some recent attacks are linked to China for espionage, and if that turns out to be the case, that completely negates the Sino-American agreement against commercial espionage, and that was supposed to be one of the founding major power agreements to push back against that kind of activity and create those norms. China even they fostered the same agreement with Canada, with Australia, and so people, while no one was, weren't optimistic that behavior would completely change, there would no longer be any kind of economic espionage. There was hope that at least some of these norms would be there to help figure out how we can respond to them and get more of a legal basis in structure. So while moving from informal to formal kind of compliance mechanisms, but I don't see that happening. The UNGGE, which is the group of governmental experts who are trying to craft norms in favor of a multi-stakeholder model, which is in favor of basically free and open internet as an overarching goal. They basically collapsed this year as far as after about 5 years worth of negotiations, just couldn't come to agreement on very, very basic things like critical infrastructure being off limits, such as not intervening in insert activities. And so really the low-hanging fruit that probably most groups should agree upon, they couldn't even get anything pushed out for that. So we're not at a high point in norms right now in this area, but at the same time, that doesn't mean we give up on it. I mean, it actually makes it more essential than ever because I think this is just going to escalate and keep getting worse as long as geopolitical tensions remain where they are. And that's the key thing with a lot of this. If all of a sudden geopolitical tensions somehow just abate, which I don't see that happening, but if it were, a lot of this would calm down. but we need to push forth those norms out there and get as many groups together as possible. And honestly, this community needs to get involved in those discussions too, because I've seen some of the norms discussions on the policy side are pushing forth perhaps some things that aren't necessarily technically feasible. So it's good to get more engagement in that discussion as well. So not optimistic, but I think that means we need to push forth and try and set some norms. I think it's more important than ever. Anything else? All right, I guess and that's time. So
I don't think we're going to make it. When you said that it's up to the people in this industry
I know.
to be able to defend against nation states.
Well, not just them, but yeah, I think it's a key role. Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I actually, and this would be for a whole different talk, but I think that this community needs to integrate more with policy. Now, I mean, no community alone can do it, right? I mean, but this community, I think, it's gonna be on the front lines, and this is where a lot of the innovation's coming from technically. So, but yeah, we could talk about it. That'd be a fun thing to talk about. Thanks, everyone. I should have done that. All right, I'm going to give you this before I forget.
Hi, I'm doing a scavenger hunt. I'm supposed to get signatures.
Okay.
Can I sign in my shirt?
No. I don't think I've ever been asked for Where do you want? Oh, look at that. God, my signature's horrible, too. Oh, no. I love beer. Yeah. I do.
Good speech. Interesting topic.
Yep.
But I mean, I do see what you're saying every day that I touch like social media.
Yep.
It's like, fuck Trump, love Trump.
Oh, yeah.
Back and forth, back and forth. And it's just, I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for that thing, this 151 class that happened to me, Soft and Please, the Art of Rhetoric, I mean, it would be very easy to follow.
Yeah, it's, we're getting into unprecedented areas, and it's really, we don't have good solutions yet. We just don't. And
the only thing I see is being the expert of the communication of the information. How do you come up with a way to legitimize the source, rate it, but then that itself would just be,
well, and that's, and I think, but I don't. I think it's worthwhile to think about that, though, right? I mean, that's we're not. From what I can tell, like a lot of those conversations aren't even really going on much yet. So,
do you take time to go and check the sources of the things you read?
I try to, but I'm not normal. So yeah, most people don't. Yeah, I'd say 99.9% people don't.
Man, look at that drone cut off that plane's wing.
Oh, I know.
Actually, that's bullshit. Do a quick search.
Yeah. Well, then even start thinking about like the ease with which you can doctor both videos and images now, just to make it even harder. I mean, it's not getting easier.
Total recall. Do you have any advice as far as give sources or information when you are, as far as countering strategic communication and propaganda and countering
yeah, and
that's not like Council Foreign Relations over there. Where do you go to stay current? Anything non-technical that
yeah, and so foreign policy, again, but and they don't do a ton on it, though, which is very frustrating to me. I should probably get out of here. So I go to foreign policy is where I read. Do you know War on the Rocks?
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
They actually report on Twitter. This was the best I saw.
Really?
Yeah.
What about Stratfor or Rand? Do they have anything good?
Rand. I've worked with some of the folks there, and I like Lily Avalon does a lot more on the weapons, the warrior side, and their IO stuff.
Yeah, that's happening in the banking industry. The Avalon network. For example, you got millions of bank consumers calling in. Right?
You get 200 million lives every day. How many lots?
Here's what we do.
So you're saying we did those 9 gentlemen sectors? Here you go.
See, but this is a good point. No, it does, even if you have.
You absolutely can win that fight though, because I was working in a company, a very large bank. We were receiving 100 gigabits of network traffic, and it was not the next generation. It was, I understand, it was a layer 7 attack. And it was a down. No, I exactly understand that. It's a thing where they were like doing logins for connections, requests that were logged down the web.
No, that's not bogged down, that's what I'm saying. And we've experienced exactly, it's lost.
Like try to log into the account multiple times.
Account discovery, for example.
Okay, enumerating accounts.
So, but it's not just trying to find out and break into the account. It's actually locking it. So let's say you have 10 factor authentication, out of band, out of wallet. The users are being notified because of the failures. They're either being locked out. The application's still functioning fine, so it's not a non-service. You're generating millions of calls and outages. That's the outage part.
So
but the consumer's out, not the product. And I do know what you mean there. We have experienced that, and it is extremely difficult to detect. Now, we have actually written some mitigations. We see the login failure from the same number of, or same IP so many times. For example, they're using botnets to do it. And they're getting smarter. They'll say, we saw where the botnet says, look, we're going to try this user account one time in 15 minutes. And we're going to try from a different source IP. So you actually couldn't even say, look, the number of login attempts from the same IP within 15 minutes. Very different. Yeah, it's a difficult. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
You got serious, like you got like.
And I agree. I thought you were talking about original network, but you're talking about the application. Yeah, they definitely could. That's an easy thing to bring down.
Okay. All right.
Well,
got it.
I definitely agree with you.
It's a tough fight. It's not an easy one. It is costly, but you absolutely.
Consumers on the consumer side thing, of the lockouts, even if you don't actually cause a failure, you get 3 failed login attempts. Sure. The user is going to get a notification when they log in the next time, and they're going to. So let's multiply that times a million consumers of Barclays. They're all calling the help desk saying, "Why did you say wrong?" That's
I understand.
That's the impact. They can't keep up. They don't have enough staff to pick up with that number of customers. Pick them up there.
So I wish I didn't have the NDA enforced, but you absolutely can rely on a lot of things, how the application responds and as an
in our
industry.
case, no one was even logging into the account. You couldn't get past multi-factor, you couldn't get past RSA, you couldn't get past, you know what I mean? So you never actually logged into it. It was just a perception.
Here's the thing, if that's the case, then why do you throw numbers at you should. Because if they're not able to even make a credible one, and that's closer to the approach.
Well, it's an approach that says, I know what you mean. That's the decision whether you want to notify the consumer know that there were attempts on their account because it wasn't successful. I'm not going to tell you. That's a good.
Not successful. Not successful. It wasn't a credible response, and that's the thing where I think.
But there's a lot of cases where, so in our case, when we did, there were millions and millions of packets coming in. The network was fine, the application was fine, and 99% of the actual attempts could not guess a valid account. But then there were the 1% that guess valid accounts and cause them to walk out because they attempted 3 times. And even after they would they would still have to step up authentication for multiple.
I think I'm on a memory forensics if you guys
But in those cases, the user couldn't log in anymore. Percent was a huge
I understand that, but what, like, are they permanent lockouts? Like, they just
No, some of them are they're all temporary, but it still generated, and I'm not talking about me specifically, one of our bank customers experienced a lot of calls.
So you pre-conflude.
I did.
What's the story?
Usually I do it like the weekend before.
Alright.
Thing. Yeah. Sit the weekend before. There you go. Watch. I thought it was stress, right? It was nasty. My gums were like swollen. I was eating everywhere.
I think that's meth. That's not strep.
You know, one of both.
Or so that's strep.
So training day one.
Strep.
So training day one, I was feeling a little sick. I was like, I'm not feeling it, maybe some bad food. So I did the only thing I could do was drink as much as I could, right? And then yesterday was bad. It's rare that I would ever need training. Even if I'm not interested, it's rare. I always think and 2 hours of training on my training, I was like, I can't. I personally got a big thing of coffee because I was like, okay, maybe caffeine will make me feel better. It works. So that was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the training shop. I was like, I'll go get. So I just class. 12 hours. They gave me a head. Couple of hours. Couple hours of class. So I went to came to the coffee hour. Still I went better the last time. $1 million now.
So what's it like being patient zero?
I know. That's what I was thinking. I was like,
I'm gonna. So yeah, thank you.
That's the only sentence I heard walking up. I'm gonna walk away now.
I'm glad you're taking personal responsibility for your own actions.
Hey, you know, somebody's got to be number one. Or 0, I guess. 0.
If I see you coughing,
Yeah, we start counting around 0.
Because I told Chelsea, I was like, don't kiss me. I'm like, in case it is something contagious, I'm like, God forbid, we'll get sick. No one will be able to drive home. You know?
What did you do?
Well, you want to drive?
I didn't say anything. I wanted to.
I didn't even drive back to the hotel. I got here. I'm like, okay, at least I can go back to the hotel and rest, right? I get up to like our showers, standstill traffic, people piss off at each other.
Well, that's true, just not today.
Yeah, that is true.
That's the vow.
I haven't actually renamed Clubhouse yet.
Yeah. Shoot, man.
You. I'm banking on robots.
Whoa. Dude, like, if, don't get me wrong, if that becomes an option, I'll take it. But,
It's currently not an option.
yeah, as of right now.
Tough scrubs probably isn't.
No.
No?
I don't think so.
They're in the future on a little bubble head thing.
No, I don't think we got like
Robo Nixon.
Yeah. Almost there.
Dude, no, we're not almost there. We're not.
I think that we're a lot closer to sustaining a brain and keeping it alive.
But there's
but we're probably not at the point where like we're probably close to the point where we can like have that. But like just keeping it on someone's head like sustaining it.
There's some interesting talks by a dude who's a molecular biologist. And he talks about attacking death as a treating disease. Right? And that's interesting. But like I have a friend of mine from childhood who's doing his PhD work at MIT on biology. And he's like,
no. What's epically bizarre occurred to me is that this conversation would be just as likely to happen on the second floor as it is here as Icon.
So are you officially done?
Well, so it's weird. No. Yeah.
No.
Yes.
No.
So it's Schrodinger's cat. like
Don't
I still,
look at him.
yeah, like I still, so, basically, I still have my laptop, I still want Slack, I'm still VPN, like all of that. Doing 1099 work. So, yeah, it was super flattering when Kennedy's like, well, I understand you gotta chase the sands thing, like that's your thing. And then he's like, but you also gotta understand, like, you're gonna be out like 3 months a year. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm not great at math, but yeah, you know, like, that's bonkers, like, you can't do that. And like, here's the money that I'm looking at. And they're like, he's like, cool, awesome. I can't even count it. I was like, it wasn't even ask. You got it. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'm trying to. It was. I think it's like there's some kind of shit. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I really still love commission and stuff. But they're all around. And I mean, it's just.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think they're going to something that you're really pretty well suited to.
Well,
you said this was like, I think we should be good.
And also the other thing too is I get to do like just weird off-the-wall research and stuff. Again, like, you know, I can sort of do that there, but like every now and then like, DK would be like, so what are you doing? Dude, I think I found a way to weaponize it. And he's like, yeah, that's been done. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but like a different way? And he's like, yeah, we're supposed to be able to do it. And I'm like, under the right light, that's blue. And he's like,
it's hard doing things for yourself, I think, professionally, because most of the time you spend so much time just trying to survive. But once you can do something for yourself, it's like, well, do I have a reason to leave? Like when I left Highland, great company. I had no reason to leave here. Good people. Excellent company. One, yeah, they had very low turnover. So me leaving, it's like literally saying, thanks for all this great stuff. You know, I gotta do something for me.
yeah.
This is what I want to need. That was really hard.
It's weird.
It's the best. Like, I'm so happy. Like, now this, and how things went down. I think all of it.
Well, alright, so you can just do that with company. Yeah. You don't want to be like, you know what I think about bridges?
So no. So here's the rule. I got this. This is from my core. He was like, look. He's like, don't burn a bridge. Like, don't even lightly sink it. But if you need to light that bridge on fire, like that thing lights your path forward. Like, you burn that hot, you burn it public, you burn that mother down. Yeah. March 4th.
Absolutely.
But like, this was not like, and that was the thing. Like, a lot of people, it was really weird. Like when I announced on Twitter and Facebook, there were people that like hit me and were like, "So what's the story behind it?" Or what's the drama? And I'm like,
No drama.
none. Like,
So no, it's
literally, like,
just moving forward.
Get it?
Just
Yeah, I mean, like,
well,
and that's the thing that like, they're like, yeah, that 1099 thing, like that's just a cover. I'm like, well, it has such a deep cover. I totally bought it.
Well, the thing is that like the situations in life where you need to burn a bridge are much than they are otherwise. I thought they do happen.
So
they do happen.
Let's put it that way. I think they're rare. I think that people take up that opportunity a little too often.
No, yeah, exactly.
Because I've had people like do that on me, and I'm like, but dude.
I think the reason people burn bridges is because they don't truly want to be where they're at.
Well, it's because everybody's walking around with gas cans.
Yeah.
Oh, let's be honest. Fire's fun.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What would be really cool to do? I don't know how to do this logistically. Well, I know how to do this. I just don't know how an insurance company wouldn't like walk up to me and shoot me in the brain. I would love to do PyroCon where it's just like, hey kids, let's play with fire. Like,
you just play Great White the whole time.
Well, like, honestly, I would just be like, hey, here's a bunch of flash.
That used to be my pitch about high school kids how to build with robotics. like so in the pitch, I was like, you know, you're running like that, this is something school, and show you how to apply that to going open door flyer and you know, and robots.
I'm not gonna lie, I would hear that sales pitch, right? Like,
kids,
well, I don't know, like, I'm 41 and I want to hear that. Like, let's blow doors open right now.
If you talk to the kids, see if you guys can stage a drama.
Yeah, do a YouTube video of a stage drama.
What if we did that? We would have to do it in such a like over the top
Right,
way.
no, just like way,
like
way.
No, like totally bizarre. Like I think it would be best done if like I had like index cards. Dave, I can't believe that you said that thing about that guy. That was totally not cool.
You want to do like a Python-esque type thing?
Yeah, Mick, he had it coming. But Dave, I thought we were gonna be that way. No, Mick. F it all. By the way, I'm not actually scared of clowns. Plot twist. What?
Hey. I guess I went to the lake and people were like my castles and then good clothes.
Oh, that'd be great.
You're out.
The problem is that, like, I think that some of the crew that are causing those wouldn't get that subtlety.
Really? Well, yeah, I mean, I do run into that when it's like, when you talk about something that's so extremely over the top, ridiculous, that but then people are like, oh no.
Is that where we're really?
Did you guys actually speak out of each other?
Yeah.
I mean, no.
Right. They're all before this one.
It's just really weird that people are trying to tell you that telling you because I don't think it was because as far as I can tell, everyone involved in this call is really genuine. And I wouldn't see putting up something.
No,
if
that
I was
was
putting up something like that if it wasn't legit.
No, the
like I really wouldn't. Like a lot of like from my company, I can see that being kind of like, oh yeah, well this isn't actually. I think that they will know we don't want you doing anything anymore. Just that we're just going to reset.
No, what I was thinking of doing, this is, so I'm really clever, like 5 minutes too late. Right? Like that's the thing.
It's the spirit of the
spirit of the stairs. Yeah.
I like
So
showing him on Twitter and asking him if he's the guy that they made that movie about, you know.
Yeah. So I thought of, just last night, I thought of the best thing that I could have done with the hugs thing, is I could have like made little speech bubble things and like have Dave saying like random stuff. Like that would have been so awesome. But like, I mean, and I still technically could do it. It's just like it would be way expensive to do it. But like, you know, stuff like that.
Do you know what you're going to teach? Do you know what you're going to teach?
For the SANS, yeah, I'm teaching 504 at the most. And then incident response and hacker techniques. So it's basically like first aid, just a little. Starting to get like way burned out on that. That's actually, I'm having a hard way of phrasing it, but one of the things InfoSec Innovations is going to do is we will not do incident response because we don't have an interest in it, but we will help you pull up the program, we will help you prep, we will help you get the battle flight, because like, I'm just, like that, I'm not proud of it, but that's not Pentium broke me. Like that, I did way too many hours in too short of a time. That like I need like a good year or so away from doing like IR in the trenches. Like I love IR, but that schedule sucks though.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Well, it's like you gotta
Well, I've slowly got there.
Well, the way you find that out, right? Is by using
Yeah.
And I'm crying in the bar. That's not good. Right. Like I spent the night shit.
Yeah. Well, actually, know a guy who, he was doing an IR thing, and he kept on, like, popping Red Bulls. What was his thing? He just kept on checking Red Bulls. I didn't know that you could do this, but if you get close to a caffeine overdose, you can actually become allergic to caffeine.
Well, when it's true, you see this thing.
So, like, he has an allergy to caffeine. Yes, and fun fact, he can get, like, if he has too much chocolate, it affects him. So, like, yeah.
Oh, thank God.
That adapter that I forgot my adapter in Ohio, so I had to go buy one at the Microsoft store, and this one doesn't look anything like the way it connects doesn't look anything like mine. So I was like, oh my God, I hope this is the right one. They didn't screw me.
What's weird is they did.
Oh yeah, I was like, wait, what? What are all these gold and white shirts? You guys all work for the same company? No.
I do like this part.
That one's, I like that one. It's awesome.
This is my put on my head day one.
I like it. The head shirts.
This was the
Head shirts and
Hold on, look at that part. You're not supposed to see that yet.
Are you serious?
Wait, no.
What determines it?
If you can call it.
He's already got one on the scoreboard.
Oh no.
Multiple.
So I just slide them right there. Can the person see me doing it, or I can just no, secret. The point is, yeah, give me some customers. I'm all about
It's a form of learning how to do social engineering. Physical.
That one's over, right? That one.
It's just a work. Just call it.
Bruce comes first. Talk. Hey, where's the one? Maybe I'll look at it. Distraction too. How are the meetings? They were pretty good, but like so I don't know if you experienced it, or not, but Amy got like shit face on yeah, and so she tried to come out and eat some more. And it was just like contagious because I can't do it. No, it was a little like I found it surreal a little bit because I never been to a place like that. And it was like you just like sit there and like bring around big things of game. It was like an easy make oven tons.
Honestly, I think it's a lot.
It's like this was a little more sentient to the big culture. That was good.
I tried that as well. I believe he's still. Oh yeah. I believe he's still. Also,
yeah, I drink more than drinking it.
Yeah. One of the not you. At least 3 times. Well, I was, I was on the
sticker? Sure.
Yeah, sure.
No, I mean, I was at somewhere.
Yeah, that was a stumble back. And then last night. Go back to sleep.
Feeling better. Right now, that's right now.
I just need to
Get a little rest.
I've been thinking about going back to that place. Eric and the pizza.
I plan to grab a beer.
Yeah, just like I like getting pizza for the bar. I hope this is super cool. Like what's pizza? And then just throw it on the floor. Yeah. Just walk out there and just have some pizza.
I like people coming in at the last minute and you miss the first part of that whole
Because like, to be fair though, I did have to take like 3 days worth of material and cram it down into 25 minutes. So
yes,
it's gonna go fast.
thing to like, I need to walk away to the bar. And not
Because I left my drink on the table and I wanted to finish. I seem to be rushing. I have to see how many people I can sit through their drink without
Oh, nice. I think that game. I think you could do, how many you got? What do you have, 6, 7?
You guys are heading out the older end.
I think we'll probably get still some minutes.
I like those coasters. I have those on my desk. That's just one. I think that
I
I
have a
use every
stack.
day.
I have a bunch of them.
I have a bunch of them, man.
I use it every day because I can just sit down at my desk and play. And then sometimes I get some of the people.
Really have friends who are putting their trays on the wall. Like,
But we don't have friends. That's pretty stuff. You know,
I don't either. This is the one time.
There you go.
I no longer have that.
I'm thinking about changing that.
He needed to borrow something, right?
I'm going to be Dave Davidson. Davidsonovich.
See, that was why Chelsea and I work out so well, because I don't have any friends, she doesn't have any friends. We both want friends, we figure we live together.
There's a lot of that.
Sometimes we'll be friends, you know. We can be friends.
Wait, that's actually good.
I was just walking by Airbnb.
So before I get started, I just want to see a show of hands on how to tailor the talk. How many people in here are engineers, software engineers? Okay, all these people up here, a couple in the back maybe? Okay. I won't get too deep into the code thing, you're probably not going to care about that. I had to take a ton of information and jam it down into a little bit, so I'm not going to waste time on stuff that you guys aren't going to hear about. We'll get going here in a minute. Do you need me to talk into this?
Yes.
Yes?
For the recording.
Oh, okay. What about right here?
Be right up.
Can I be right here? Can you hear me in the back? I like to project.
Kind of far away from the recording anyway.
Can I be right here?
Yeah.
Okay. This is good?
For the recording.
For the recording.
Yeah.
Can you hear me in the back? Good? Okay, cool. Any ex-military? Couple feds? Right? I'm ex-military, and I was an MP, and they always used to tell us, project our voice, use our MP voice. That's it. What's that? Yeah, there you go. They used to tell us that we should be able to stop a car on the freeway at 60 with just our voice, and I thought that was crap. I didn't think it was true, but it's true. You can. I'm not a cop anymore though, so tell me all your illegal stuff. I'm cool with that. All right, so we good? You want to get started? Camera person? Yes? What's your name?
Corey.
Corey. Do I know you already?
I don't think so.
Okay, hi, I'm Anthony.
Nice to meet you.
I work remote, so I work with all these people, and I have no idea who they are. So they're like, hey, I know you. I'm like, that's cool. All right, so we'll get started. My name is Anthony Russell. My Twitter handle is .NETRussell.
and this is building Google for criminal enterprises. So if that wasn't what you wanted to see, I'm sorry, you're stuck in here now. This is my Who Am I? You probably, I don't know if you can see it in the back. I do cybers and codes, and if you want to hit me up on Twitter, you can, .netrussell, or you can follow my blog, .netrussell.com. I really don't like going too much into my bio because I don't have one. Here are some things we're going to cover. I'm going to talk about quickly why this project was started, what public data is and where you can find it, scraping data, linking public data to the scraped data, who cares about this, how I would fix it personally, and I have a tool that I made that is a proof of concept that's going to show why this stuff is bad. So here's the disclaimer. We're going to be looking at some sensitive data today. By sensitive data, I mean I'm going to be showing live data of real people that exist. They're innocent people. Please don't use this data to harass them. Please be respectful. Be an adult. I don't condone the illegal use of this material for anything other than research. On that note, the government publishes this data, okay? Either where I get this, either the government has published it or the person themselves have put this on the internet. So I think it's fair game. I want to make somebody upset. I hope somebody gets mad about this. I hope one day one of these people are like, hey, why am I in this guy's presentation and I have no idea who they are? I hope that they get mad about it and they complain to the government and we fix these problems. I had some conversations about redacting this. We had some long, deep talks about whether or not we should even make a tool like this, but I think it's important, and I think the only way it's going to get fixed is if we abuse it, so let's do that. By the way, I spoke to an attorney, don't sue me. So why this project? It started out as I like to do public speaking. Obviously, I like to come here. I want to speak, but it's a challenge. You know, if you want to put your information out there saying, hey, I like to speak, I like to do conferences, here's my information, you know, I don't want it to get rated by companies and governments and all different types of stuff. I don't think that just because it's out there that it should be fair game. So it's a balancing act, you know. So like I said earlier, I'm a veteran, I'm an OIF vet, I like to take challenges head on, so that's what I did with this. So I started out by saying, okay, well, I want to do a presentation on how people that speak publicly can become private and still have a public profile. So I started by opting out of all the things. I tried doing that. I tried scrubbing my social media by throwing mud in the water, like I would change my birthday to 1901, January 1st, because once it's on Facebook, it's never going away, so you might as well muddy it up a little bit. It hurts the algorithms. I tried scrubbing all my emails against have I been pwned and deleting the ones that have actually been compromised. I added myself to the do not call list, which shockingly doesn't work. I uninstalled, obviously, apps on my phone that required an insane amount of permissions, and I used those cleanup services online, all of which I found were garbage. So opting out, yeah, none of that worked. The big websites, like the big data websites that collect your information online, you can opt out of them, but you know, I hit a wall eventually. I hit this wall and there was no more opting out, but yet my data was still out there and I couldn't figure out why. And then I said, you know, maybe I need a different approach. Maybe I need to figure out what they're doing to get my information, and then I needed to take it, and instead of selling it for profit, I need to abuse it and write a tool that abuses it, and then maybe we can fix this problem, because opting out doesn't work. So I started looking into things to seed my malicious tool, right? So I said, why not start with public data? I looked at data that the government made public, like your local government, your state government, the federal government. Then I looked at things that people make public on their own, like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. And then I looked at APIs, like the People API. Is anybody familiar with People? Yeah, it's great source. Yeah, PIPL. That's great source of information. Here are some of the government data sources I found: the voter registration database, public data records such as home sales, you know, like land records and stuff. Traffic violations. If you get a ticket, sorry, it's out there. If you register your pet, I like this one. I don't know why this is public, but if you register your pet, that information's out there, your name and address. I put car registration on here with a question mark because I bought a car this year, and all of a sudden I started getting a ton of information or a ton of ads and stuff. So somewhere that is public, and I haven't been able to find it yet. But if I can find it, I'm definitely going to abuse that because that's awesome. What's that? It was a used car. So I went with the Ohio Voter Registration Database. It was the biggest one. It was the easiest to find, and it wasn't illegal to download. So I downloaded, it was something like 6.5 million voter records. It was over like 2 files. They make it really easy for you. They break it down by county. They break it down by, I think, city, or you can just download the whole state. So I went with that. And they update it all the time. They update it weekly. So if somebody registers, they get added in immediately for you. So now that we have our public data, which included name, date of birth, home address, your party affiliation if you register that, things like that. Now that we have that seeding our database, now it's time to start grabbing the more in-depth information like Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or the PIPL API or Instagram. So I ended up going with Facebook and PIPL. I wanted to do a LinkedIn one, but I didn't have time to build that, so I didn't. I wanted to try and find a way to do Twitter, but it's still too anonymous. People don't put enough personal information on there for me to strongly correlate a person to their Twitter profile, so I didn't do that one. And I didn't really care about Instagram. It's fun after you get all the information on the person. It's fun to go to Instagram and get some more because you can see like where they go and the pictures of the food they take and stuff like that. So you can figure out kind of like their patterns of where they like to live and do things. But as far as doing that, using it as initial seeding information, it's a little tough. So I started scraping Facebook. If you don't know, if you haven't tried, Facebook really doesn't like you scraping their information. They go out of their way to try and stop you. They do this thing where they will load the page up, and then they have these containers that will go out and do AJAX calls. AJAX calls are just asynchronous calls that run in the background. So like you'll load Facebook, and the container for Facebook will load, and then it'll say, okay, go out and get the actual detailed information. So when you use tools like curl or links or whatever, it doesn't load that information. So it makes it really tough for scraping. Funny thing is though, they leave like automation IDs and things like that in the code. So you can easily just reach in with regexes and grab the values once the page, if you can get the full, all the information back, it's easy to grab it out. And I'm gonna show you how. I use something I call multipath scraping. It's just something arbitrary I made up. These 2 URLs, these are what you want to note. This top one right here, you can call it authenticated with Facebook or like not logged in at all, unauthenticated, and you can get all the profiles back. So I would call this top one and I would say where the person's name equals Anthony space Russell, Ohio, and I'll get all the Anthony Russells in Ohio back that register Facebook back like that. And you can do that not logged in. The second one, oh yeah, this is the example right here of it. So John Smith, Ohio. This would be the results that you would get. So you get all the John Smiths from Ohio back, different cities. So how do we get that information? So like I was saying, I tried using things like curl, wget, and links. Couldn't get them to execute the embedded AJAX. So then I started using the different types of browsers. We won't cover those because there's not enough engineers in here. They're not going to care. So how I get the information out is I use this thing called a regex. Does everybody know what a regex is? Some people? Okay, yeah, so regexes they're pattern matching. You can give it a pattern to look for in some text. It doesn't have to be code, it can be text. In fact, people try and discourage you from using regexes to parse HTML, but that's a whole nother story. I use it, it works really well. This is an example of what we might do. I have these 3 lines of text and I want that middle one. So I would tell my regex to find this ID right here and then grab me the text in the middle. And that's kind of how I'm doing that's kind of how I'm doing the searching on the Facebook pages. I use, for the people that care, this is what I use. It's a very simple regex. I'm not a regex pro. I use this one pattern over and over and over again, and it works really well. It's a positive look behind, and then I match lazily to an unlimited amount of characters, and then I use a positive look ahead. We're going to kind of skip through this because, like I said, people probably aren't going to care. So these are the, this is actually an example of how we're getting the URLs out. So I have, this is the first half of the regex, and it says come up to this point. This says match everything in between this point and this point. And that's how we get this text and the blue text right there. So when you run that over the code, it will give you all of the profile links. So if I say search John Smith, Ohio, and then I run that regex on the results, the HTML results, I'll get all the profile links of the John Smiths in Ohio. And then I can iterate over each of those profiles, and I can say, okay, now give me the details from each of those pages. And to do the details, I use something called multipass. So each of these blue blocks is a section of information that we're grabbing. Like this first one is for a local high school, the second one is for the classroom of tomorrow, and the third one says Alliance, Ohio. And it would be up to my code to figure out, you know, to put these in a context what they are, but just the fact that we can get the data, that's the hard part. We can get the data and we can correlate it to a person, that's the hard part. So that's me grabbing it out of there. So gluing it all together. So we know we have the records from the voter database. The voter database gave us a full name, a date of birth, and a home address, an exact location, right? And then we searched Facebook for, you know, John Smith, Ohio. And we know that John Smith in Ohio is from Lorain. So then we start iterating over each of those profiles and pulling out the details, and then we start looking at the details and seeing if it matches up to our voter database. So I can, for every detail, I'll say, does this detail contain Alliance, Ohio, Lorain, Ohio, or, you know, does it contain the city of the person that I'm looking at? If it does, that's a strong correlation for that person, because usually there's only going to be one John Schmuckatelli from, you know, Cincinnati, Ohio, or whatever. You know, there's only going to be one or two people from that city with that name that list that in their Facebook page. So that's a really strong connection. Here's an example that I did. I queried for all of the 18-year-olds in Lakewood, Ohio, and then I picked a random person, okay? So we have Samantha Atkins here. She was born in 1998, September 30th, and she lives in Lakewood. So we're going to try and find her. So I ran that query, the Facebook search query for Samantha Atkins, Ohio, and you see we get all these results back, right? Well, then we pull down each profile, and we start building confidence scores on the profile, all right? Now what I do is these are totally arbitrary, so if there's any data scientists in here that want to give me a better scoring mechanism, please do, but this seems to work pretty well. For the first name, I get 0.15 points. For the last name, I get 0.15 points. So if both the first name and the last name exist in the profile, they can get a total of a 0.3, okay? And then I do the same thing for city and state. If both city and state are found, they get a 0.7. If just the state is found, they get a 0.1, and if just the city is found, they get a 0.4. So we add this all up, and we get a confidence score. So I ran over all of those profiles that returned for Samantha Atkins, and you see that one of the profiles stands out from all the others. We have a confidence score of 1.02, and the closest one that's next is 0.43, so it's not even close. Now, if we open up that profile, sure enough, it's Samantha Atkins. She's from Lakewood, Ohio, and we can start grabbing more personal information from her. We know things like her full legal name. We know her home address, her date of birth. She has photos, interests, her relationship status, her sexual orientation now, and then other personal information like her likes and apps she has installed. Great for targeted phishing. But we can do more than that. So what if we did this in reverse? I started with the voter database, And then I worked up to a Facebook page, and I started thinking, you know, if we can do this, I wonder if we can go the other way. So if we can use the built-in Facebook searching mechanisms that because they have some great stuff. Like I could say, oh, I want to go find a friend that works at the same company as me, or I want to go find a friend that went to this college or lives in this city. So we can find groups of people, and we can filter them, and then we can resolve that back to their home address. So what if we did this for things like USPS or the Cleveland Police Department or Cleveland Fire Department or the Perry Nuclear Power Plant in Ohio or the Ohio National Guard? Doing stuff like this, it lets us build target profiles on people that work at critical infrastructure. So I built this tool. I wanted this to be more than just a theory. I wanted to actually put it into practice and prove that this was possible. So I built this tool called Alohomora, and let me connect to the internet. I built this tool called Alohomora that does this for you. We can go both ways. We can do the voter database up to Facebook. We can do Facebook back to the voter database. I can also do some SMS spoofing and stuff in here. I built some fun modules. Oh, I gotta log in too. Oh man, this is a huge fail, sorry. Did I mess that up? Wow, fail whale. Should I use the DerbyCon one? Who knows the DerbyCon one? No one knows the password? What's that? Yeah, right? I was using the Hyatt one just earlier and it was working fine. I don't know why it's not now. It's just DerbyCon lowercase? Don't hack me, bro, okay? Hopefully that gives us some internets. Okay, yeah, cool. Thank you, whoever that was. I wish I had something to give you. Okay, cool. So here's the tool. So when you first open it up, you get some target dashboard. These are targets that I've already searched for, and we can open it up and see the details. We'll do that here in a second. But over here on the left are the different modules that I've made so far. And I made this tool so it's easy to add modules. So if anybody's interested in building, it's all on GitHub. Please feel free to add in. The first thing we're going to look at is the voter database to Facebook. So I'm just going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to say, give me people that were born after January 1st, 1998, that live on this street in Lakewood, Ohio. I don't have to put Ohio in because my database is rigged for, it's rigged for Ohio already. But if you wanted to, you could put whatever database you want in there. So if you're, because all these voter databases, they're standardized across the states. So if you have another one you want to use, hook it up. I have the settings in here, and you can change all the connection string and all that stuff. It's real easy. So we get all these people back. These are people that are over 18 that live in that area. And I think this one returns some good results. So this is going to go get all the profiles, and then we're going to scan all the profiles. And then it takes a second because it's actually chugging through them. It's actually the regex that takes so long. And we're cutting through all of them at the same time. But what it's going to do, it's going to pull them all down, and it builds a confidence score. And you can see we got Sean Gallagher back, and pretty sure we have found him because it's a 1.02 score, and none of the other ones are even close. So if we open up the page, sure enough, Sean Gallagher, Lakewood, Ohio, and we got all his personal likes and dislikes and things in a matter of seconds. So that's the voter database demo. We can also do this with going the other way. Nope, not that one. Don't worry, this is a fake Facebook profile. It's Kittler. So if you guys want to follow him, you can. So this is just the Find My Friends link, or Find My Friends page in Facebook. So I'm going to go to the employer, and I'm going to search for Perry Nuclear, which is the nuclear plant in Ohio, which nuclear plants have been phishing targets for hackers recently, so it's kind of a big deal. And as you see here, a lot of these people work for, the Perry Nuclear Power Plant. So let's import this into our application. Now, these are all the profiles we just saw. They just ripped them down into the application, and we could start operating on them. So I'm just going to pick one here. I don't know who any of these people are, so this is probably another giant fail. See if I find one I recognize. Let's just try the top one. I don't know who this is, but I have a couple examples of ones that I've already pulled down. Okay, yeah, so this lady, Carolyn, she's from Madison, Ohio. We can try the voter search, and it'll see if we get her home address back. And if not, we'll search the people database and see what we get back from there. I used Azure. I just put it all up in Azure, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, what did I use to host my database? I just put it on Azure. It was cheap. All of this research, everything over the last 6 months, cost me about $30, so it's really not that bad. You can see here we got her home address back, and that's based on the information I pulled out of her Facebook profile. And now we can run that across people, and as you see, we get a response back from that, and we get a couple phone numbers, her name, past addresses. So, I mean, we have a ton of information on this lady now. So what I'm going to do, and now this is just a test People API key. If you actually purchased a key, you would get a ton more information. I just didn't want to pay for it because I'm cheap. And I think the proof of concept speaks for itself. So I'm going to select this information and add it to our dashboard. And now you see here she is. She's on the dashboard. And if I open up the target, it pulls up a little Google map of where she lives, and we got her phone numbers. We can add some notes here. Hello. And that'll persist between sessions. But we can also open up the SMS board here, and I built in a API, or I integrated with the text build API, so you can spoof text messages to her. And I'm also working on connect.data. I did the red team versus blue team training here, and they were saying that you'd like to use the connect data to try and find emails and stuff. So I'm in the process of working that in as well. And that'll be great for companies, targeted phishing on companies. So that's pretty powerful. Definitely a little worrisome, but who cares, right? Well, I would think anybody that works at critical infrastructure like nuclear power plants or police departments, like when I was a cop, I mentioned earlier I was in the Army, I was an MP, I would not want people knowing where I live. It's just how it is. Like, I would not want somebody I gave a ticket to, or somebody that I just caught for a DUI or caught cheating on their spouse. I wouldn't want them knowing where I live or my family. Like, that's not a good thing. Also, young people that can be targeted predators. If you're 18, a lot of 18-year-olds like to vote. Guess what? Now I can find you. That's kind of a big deal. Like I said, we saw the nuclear power plants. They've been targets of hackers in the very recent news. And we were able to acquire a lot of information. What's stopping me from finding a janitor and then maybe trying to, target them, spearfish them? What would I do about it? I like to add this in because I'm not one to bitch and then not fix problems. Like, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you there's something broken without offering a solution. You want to fix this? We need to, one, stop the states from publishing the entire voter record database. I understand why it's searchable. That's important for integrity. But I shouldn't be able to download 6.5 million records. That's a problem. Also, if I could speak directly to Facebook, I would say, why do you let people make things public by default? It should only be visible to your friends by default, and then they should have to opt into making it public. I shouldn't be able to scrape people's information without knowing them. Like, I don't know, that's silly. So the summary is you can't opt out of the internet. If you vote, get tickets, own property, register your dog, anything like that, you're gonna be on the internet and I can find your data. Anybody can. It's not a magic trick. And the laws need to catch up. I actually spoke with the state of Ohio, and I asked their IT department why this stuff was public, and they kind of shrugged at me, and they were like, because of the laws. They agree it's a problem, but there's nothing they can do. And that was the official response that I got from them. So that's it. There's my contact information. There's the repo if you want to pull it down. I encourage everybody to pull it down. And if you need help setting up your voter database, please let me know. I'm happy to help. That's the only thing you should have to really configure. There's my Twitter. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. And then also my blog. I'm always posting about hackery and stuff on there. So please feel free to reach out. And I think we have about 3 minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free. Yes? I'm sorry, repeat that one more time. What about teachers? I'm sorry, I'm still having trouble. So you're saying that there's salary information online?
Well, like teachers, they publish a database, like every state they publish a database.
Oh, okay.
Information on teachers. Is there anything that someone in that position takes?
We're all screwed. There's no hiding this. So the question was, how do you hide information that's being published on educators, like salary information? The whole point of this is that we're all screwed. There's nothing we can do unless we change the laws. The government is publishing this data, and there's no opting out. Like I bought a house. Now everybody can see how much I paid for it. Everyone can see my tax information. Everybody can see exactly where I live, and in some instances my phone number. And if I have a DUI or that stuff automatically gets pushed to the web, and you have no say in it, and you're never notified. So as far as salary information, it's going to be the same thing, I would imagine. Anybody else? Yes.
I may have missed it, but were you, when you were mentioning querying that Facebook URL, were you able to validate that you're able to pull back results from people who try to set their privacy parameters to just some friends?
Anything that got pulled back was public. It was set to public data. Yeah. So I intentionally created an account that was just a fake account because I didn't want to make friends with anybody. I wanted this to be as anonymous as possible. So all those people have no idea who I am, and it's a fake account. And fun thing is, though, if you create a fake account, you'll get all types of friends requests. So try it. It's a good time. All right, one more question. Yes?
Try using public military records?
I have not done military records yet. I did not know about that, but that sounds like a good time. We should link up and talk about that. All right, if you have any more questions, I'll be out in the hall shortly, and I can answer them there. Thank you very much for coming. All right. Sorry, I tried to get out of your way. I know you're waiting. What's that?
It's my job right there.
Good luck, Kobe.
Thank you.
I don't know. Sorry.
Okay. Let's hope it's mine.
They were having people check in down there, but I mean, I wouldn't now.
Check in? Down where?
Down in the last room on the left before Starbucks. There's some people that's where the speakers check in at.
I was talking about his girlfriend. Well done, you go.
Thank you.
So he was getting all fired up. And I'm like, yeah, just to clarify.
There's you right there. Yeah, just asking if I have looked at the public filter. I didn't even know that what I'm saying. Yeah, I should look at that though because I don't know, but I'm
You'll feel.
Do you know what talk is now? You know? Who's showing now? Like, who's giving the talk? Or what the talk is about? No? Okay, cool. Let's hope it's mine. Or it's gonna be very awkward. צריך את הקו שלי. Source.
It's not going to show up on the video. I don't think
AG11. Come on, it's AG11. Whew. So stable talks are here, right? What?
Hope so.
Yeah, me too. Like, can you hear me? Yeah, cool.
Is there some other adapter up here that's...
Some other adapter? Do they need what? They can see it?
Yeah, but it's not on the recording. There's something that feeds it to that equipment over there.
Maybe my boss listened to me and asked not to record this, and then magically it happened.
What's that?
No, never mind.
There's something down here.
Isn't the camera like?
The camera is working, but the feed from this.
Do you want me to send you the keynote, or PPTX, and then somehow honor that? I can send the presentation itself, because.
Okay, it's not going to be in the live stream.
Is there another adapter or something, like a splitter? Because I'm going in directly, so it's probably needs to go through some kind of like a splitter.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works.
Never mind. I'll give you the. So it won't be on the live feed. I'll give you this thing. So tell me when you want to start.
Okay, hang on a second.
Cool. Do you have like a presenter? Never mind, I need to speak to the microphone. I'll be next to the laptop anyways.
Let me see if somebody's available to fix that.
Is it because I didn't check in?
Check in? No, probably not.
Okay.
I'm not sure how that's connected to feed into this, but usually the folks with Apple, they have like a little adapter and just plug in what's up there, and that's all that you're plugging stuff in the back.
Anyway, okay, so anyways, we're kind of behind schedule, so can I start and then we wing it? Cool. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Viagra, the biggest, the largest cyber criminal spam botnet there is, that I know of at least. We're going to start. First of all, I want to say that I'm really excited to be here. It's like a everlasting dream of mine to be in DerbyCon, so thank you very much for having me here. Second of all, we're going to start with a little demo. I need a volunteer from the crowd to test these counterfeit Viagra. Anyone? No? Okay, fine, I'll take one.
Yesterday you tried to offer them to me.
Okay, so it takes about 25 minutes to 30 minutes to take effect. And that's exactly the time we have for the talk, so I think we'll be fine, or else it would become awkward. Okay, so I am Kobe. I used to work as a penetration tester and a developer. Right now I work as a security researcher for a company called Imperva. We specifically are located in Israel. My division is in charge of the SaaS solution called Incapsula. This is my social information. And if you don't quite catch my accent, it's Israeli. I'm sorry about that, but if you could withstand Gal Gadot's acting in Wonder Woman, accent in Wonder Woman, then I think you'd be okay with my accent. So, as I'm notoriously known for my crude sense of humor, my boss told me that I can't have too many dick jokes here. So, pardon the pun, but I'm gonna finish quick and let you see about 3 memes I found on the internet, and that's it. There's the first one. The second one. And the third one. That's my favorite, if you like interracial. So our story begins with this specific molecule. It's called sildenafil citrat. That's the active ingredient in Viagra. It was invented by a bunch of scientists in Pfizer. At first, they tried to create a cure for blood pressure and angina. But in vivo clinical trials have shown that it didn't quite work like they expected, but the test subjects were really happy to see them. So they've decided to use that to treat erectile dysfunction instead. A little bit about the history of Viagra. It was patented back in 1996. Then it was right back then, they were already starting to make generic replacements for that. It was invalidated in 2013 in Canada, which sort of gave validation to generic companies that were producing those other drugs, and to counterfeit manufacturers, because they could come up to you and say, I'm not selling you fake Viagra, I'm just selling you some generic substance. Well, essentially what they're selling you is just some counterfeit drug from China or India or whatever. It will also expired at that time at the European Union, and in 3 years it's going to expire worldwide, and then you'll be able to sell your counterfeit drugs to anyone. A little bit about the economy of the Viagra industry. Take, for example, this famous stallion. This is the most expensive stallion to date. It costs $70 million. Does anybody know the name of the horse? Come on, I'll give you a t-shirt. No. His name is Fuseichi Pegasus. You will need 22 of that horse, 22 times that horse to get the annual income of Viagra. That's 1.5 million. On the other hand, if you have 1.5 million worth of Viagra, you probably just need one stallion and just dope it up. Back to our industry, the salary for one software engineer is $100,000 a year. You will need this amount of software engineers to cover for the yearly revenue of Viagra. Just kidding, twice as much. Now, the top-selling drug is not Viagra. Viagra is just in the 40th place with $1.5 billion a year. There are many more drugs that are giving better income, but Viagra is the noisiest when it comes to spam. Like just a few of them are even in spam campaigns at all. 10% of the pharma market, according to the World Health Organization, is counterfeit drugs. That means, and I'm talking about all the drugs, not just Viagra. That's 21 billion revenue a year. According to the Interpol, 1 million of the there's a 1 million death toll per year from using counterfeit drugs. That sounds like a huge number to me. It just sounds a bit too big, so I would take it with a grain of salt. A, they have the incentive to inflate that number. B, it's the Interpol. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. When GlovMed Spamit got raided, they found out they had a $67.7 million income in 2009. And when RX Promotion got raided, you saw 12.8 million. No wonder that this is the #1 spamming campaign in the world, according to Spamhaus. Canadian Pharmacy is like, that's the name that they're using. It's not Canadian Pharmacy themselves. So now that you know that Viagra pays a lot of money, you want to get in. You want to take the blue pill and get into the Viagra matrix and start selling yourself. So let's get the basis. You can get this specific e-commerce solution from many places. Usually it's in Russian, but not all the time. The client side is translated to many languages, so don't worry. You just need to Google Translate your way into installing this thing. They offer 30 to 50% commission. They give you templates, banners, all the bells and whistles, and you get full API support out of the bat without paying anything. So you don't need to meddle with CSS, HTML, all that stuff. You just plug and play. Now, when you read the About page, you see that those guys know exactly where the traffic is coming from. They're saying most of our traffic is coming from email dispatches, which is just a fancy name for spam. And second of all, they're saying anonymity is guaranteed. Why would you need anonymity if you're not doing something shady? Now, about the templates. This is one template they offer. This one is for Canadian Pharmacy. And another one for United Pharmacy, so we don't need to get a graphic design guy. Plus, you can see the bottom guy is very happy because he has a full head of hair. Believe me, I know. There's another one for CVS Pharmacy, if you like to sell to Americans. If you would like the Indian crowd better, there's Indian Pharmacy. And there's the one I like the most, which is Erection Pack. And there are many, many more. You can choose whichever. Now that you have your spam site, your drug site online, and you want to sell to people, you have the whole e-commerce solution, you need to get people to your site. How will you do that? You have two options. You can even mix and match between the two. One of them is using spam mail. The other one is using SEO. SEO stands for search engine optimization. It's like different ways to get your site on the top list in Google and other search engines that don't matter. You have two variants of SEO. One is white hat and the other one is black hat. The thing is, with white hat SEO, you go to a legitimate company that does SEO. You pay them, they backlink to you, they do blog posts, it takes time, it's cumbersome. Sometimes you need to pay even more than you would pay for a black hat guy. And at the bottom line, your site is doing something shady, so you're not going to be online for a lot of time. You want to make your buck, you want to be at the top of the line real fast, and then like throw it away once you did your got your cash. One instance of black hat SEO that we saw on our network and analyzed was this sort of botnet that said a user agent that had an MS SQL injection in it. As you can see, the injection itself searches for any table that is not system. Then it goes every 10 records. You can see the modulo 10 and enters the backlink to their site, selling thyroxine, okay, and some other drug. As you can see, the fourth link at Google, the first page, is the thyroxine link, so it worked. And the HTML in the title kind of gives you a hint that either you're dealing with a really, really bad coder or a hacker that does black hat SEO. Now let's go for the second variant that we've seen. The second is the spammer option. When you do spam, you need a domain to send people to. you need email lists, which are readily available for free or you can buy for really cheap. And you need an email server to dispatch those emails to those guys. So, and that can be done using open SMTP relays, cracked SMTP relays, cracked IMAP, or cracked servers that support SendMail. So our guys used that variant, cracking web servers, and they implemented this famous web shell. It's called WSO. You can find it on GitHub. If you want, use it at your own risk. So the payload they sent, then after they install this backdoor, they send another payload. This is the payload using the PHP action. The payload itself was base64 encoded, that it was decoded and written into disk. And this was the custom shell that they passed in the PHP action. Everybody follows? Okay. This specific, we nicknamed this specific web shell Matryoshka, which is kind of a mix between base64 and Matryoshka, which is the Russian doll that's inside the doll that's inside the doll. Why is that? It's because the payload passed to this web shell is the spam post itself. There's a key, which is the password, and the value, which is base64 decoded, then base64 decoded, then base64 decoded, then base64 decoded, then you. You're a smart guy. You're getting a T-shirt. Then base64 decoded, then base64 decoded again, then split by a pipe into 4 fields, base64 decoded 3 more times, and the resulting value gives you the email and whom to send the spam to. Okay? The reason they did that is because usually when a researcher sees something that looks like base64 encoding, they will automatically just try to decode it. Maybe once, maybe twice, maybe reverse and then decode. And if they still see gibberish, those guys were optimistic and thought we would give up. The thing is, there's a small caveat, small caveat with using so much base64 decode, and that's overdosing on it. If you use base64 encoding too much, there's a slight issue. I will show it right away. But first, let's dig in and see how base64 encoding works. So what essentially happens in base64 is that it takes 8-bit characters, splits them into groups of 6. In those groups of 6, it gets numbers between the values of 0 to 63. Then it uses those values in a lookup table to get ASCII characters, A to Z, 0 to 6, plus or slash. It takes those characters, creates a string, and writes it back as ASCII. However, there's one letter, V, ironically, like Viagra, that is special. The ASCII code for it is 01010110, and the base64 code is 010101. You are the base64 guy. Do you know what happens when you base64 encode capital V? What you get? Capital V again. Then you're stuck on capital V. No matter how many times you will encode your character, you will get capital V. There are three more letters, capital T, capital U, and capital W, that when you encode them, you get to capital V, and you're still stuck. Then there's another group of characters that needs 2 hops to get stuck on capital V. Further on, until you cover all the ASCII. We've created a Python script that shows how many hops you need to cover all the ASCII to get to capital V when base64 encoding. And we found out that at most you need 5 hops to get capital V if you're encoding a character. The same goes for lowercase m, then 0, then w, etc., etc. And then what we got is a fixed prefix. So these guys were so worried about the not getting caught that they actually got themselves caught. It had an amazing entropy, like the password was different for each server, and the payload itself, because you're sending an email to someone else, and the information inside, everything changed. We couldn't catch them. But the fact that they used base64 encoded so many times, they gave it the signature. They gave it like this little present. Thank you, Ukrainians. Okay, so what else do you need? You don't need a single domain. You need more than one domain, because there's this thing called a spam list, spam blacklist. Once you send a domain once or twice in a spam mail, people get on it, and they add it to this list, and then you get into the junk mail, and no one reads your email. So you need many domains. But those many domains, they get fast into the list, and they cost plenty of money, and even if you can resolve, you will still get in the blacklist pretty fast. So there's another cool thing they did, which is a mechanism they developed to bypass the filters when you are still blacklisted as a domain. How did they do that? They used the WSO shell again, but this time the payload that they passed was this specific PHP that what it did essentially is write an htaccess file into the hacked web server, which was a legitimate server altogether. Like no matter which page you will go, as long as it was the site's page, you will get a legitimate page, everything is okay. But once you get to a non-existent page, let's say dogfood.com/abc123, you will get a 404 page that had the domain that they wanted. And then you get redirected to the Cialis sales site, Viagra sales site. Okay, they say Cialis, Viagra, Elvitra, everything. This is the basic infrastructure they have. One domain got hacked and had the Batryoshka, the base64 payload. It was sending the spam email, and inside of it there was this link going to a 404 page on a legitimate domain, other domain they hacked. Sometimes it was on the same site even. The unsuspecting client would get the email with that link and get redirected to the spam site. Pretty simple. This is the infrastructure. We've seen that a lot of the hacked sites that sent those payloads were around the Russian Federation, Indonesia, and Egypt. And surprisingly, Canadian pharmacy copycats did not get out of Canada almost at all. And so the same goes for the United States. And it's something that we rarely see because the United States has a lot of computers and usually the spread is quite even. This gives you a notion of how many IPs we saw of hacked servers. And again, this is just a domain list we saw that was bought in a single day. So if every single domain costs like $10, they've wasted $350 just on those domains, just to get through spam filters. That means they are making a lot of money. They don't care to do the extra investment because there's such big revenue. So, by the way, if you want this list, the extended list, I will gladly give it to you. Just come to me after the talk. So to wrap this up, it's interesting to see that those guys, how much you can see, how many hackers you can see that go and put forward the effort when they see there's money in a certain business. Second of all, sometimes it's an example of sometimes how it's fascinating to see that once someone hacks the site, sometimes they don't use the breach to get the database credentials or information from the site. The hack itself is not meant to get stuff from the site, but it's only to utilize the site for something else. Be it, in this instance, it's spam. In other instances, it's DDoS or mining. And we see it like a new phenomenon, not so new, it's like for a decade now, but appearing more and more. Because once you compromise a site and you do something to it, the person owning the site will get rid of you faster. But if you're making money by proxy, maybe the compromise will be a lot more worth it, worth more of your time. And there's a time where a hacker's paranoia can shoot them in the foot, and that's what I've just showed you with the base64 encoding. Whew, thank you. Anybody who won or wants t-shirts can come afterwards. I left it in my hotel, but just ping me or add me on Twitter and just tell me that you want a t-shirt, I will give you. It's a cool one, Death to DDoS. Who's next? It's just open. Any questions, by the way? I have 5 more minutes till the Viagra takes effect. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not condoning. It's just for headaches because I have a hangover. Nothing? Okay, then thank you.
up. It's funny yesterday. It's funny yesterday. You were like, "Hey," I was like, "I don't know, man. I don't know what you just offered me."
I want to disconnect it.
What did you disconnect down here? Just so I can put it back the way it was.
There was this VGA connected directly to the. This is mine, and there was a VGA cable that was laying here, and I just threw it down, and I didn't disconnect anything. Just connected the.
So okay, so you, I got you. Okay, so you didn't have the adapter, so you changed your mind.
Which is great because then I had my notes.
Okay. Okay, nothing. I got it. Let's monitor out. So he didn't do anything on that side. Scalar over here we gotta find.
Was I clear enough?
Just got here.
Just got here.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That's our audio. You got an HDMI or a VGA Alright, so let's go get the USB device view.
Say,
Is that real Viagra?
did I stutter too much?
Stutter?
Stutter or
No,
no?
I can understand you.
It was sort of okay. Cool. Because I was nervous as fuck.
It's recorded in a slightly different format because usually the signal from the laptop is run straight into a program that formats it with your camera side by side.
Ah, with the.
But you're just on the camera because I did not get that signal.
Okay.
No big deal. Should be fine.
Yeah.